Hello there, and welcome to the Snoozy Scientist. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend a little piece of your evening, morning, or maybe somewhere in between, winding down with me. Tonight, we're drifting back into a time when our species was not the only kind of human walking this planet, a time far stranger and far more recent than most of us were ever taught. Around 50,000 years ago, on a small island in Indonesia, long after modern humans had already crossed Asia, another kind of human walked its forests, valleys, and volcanic slopes. When their bones were first uncovered, researchers believed they belonged to a child, until they realized the truth that it was a full grown adult, unlike any human ever seen before. These tiny people, now called Homo floresiensis, lived in a world shaped by erupting volcanoes, sudden floods, and predators far larger than themselves. Yet they carved out a life with surprising skill. They made stone tools so sharp and precise that they should have been far beyond the abilities of a brain no bigger than a grapefruit. They hunted, gathered, explored, and adapted with a quiet resilience that still puzzles science today. For tens of thousands of years, they endured through rising seas, through ecological chaos, even though the arrival of modern humans, us, and then they vanished. No bodies, no mass graves, no final struggle written into the soil, just a sudden silence in the places where their footprints should continue. But what kind of world shaped such tiny humans? How did they endure so long in a place filled with danger? And what could erase an entire human species so gently, leaving behind almost nothing at all? Tonight, we'll follow the traces they left, the tools, the caves, the fragments of bone, to step quietly into their story and listen to whatever it's still trying to tell us. But before we begin, if you enjoy these quiet journeys into the past, it would mean so much if you gave this video a gentle like, or perhaps subscribed for more sleepy science stories like this one. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments, where are you listening from tonight, and what time is it where you are? Now get comfortable, maybe pull the covers a little closer, let your mind soften, and let's begin. Long before anyone uncovered the bones that changed our story, there was already something remarkable about the island where they were found. The island of Flores, sitting quietly in the heart of the Indonesian archipelago, has always been a world that feels slightly apart from the rest of Earth. It stretches along the sea like a curved strand of dark green, where the land rises and falls in steep volcanic ridges. The slopes climb sharply from the coast, then break into valleys hidden by forest and mist. From above, the island looks almost folded in on itself. There are few straight lines here. Instead, the land twists and turns like an ancient memory. Ancient volcanoes once shaped these ridges. They pushed stone toward the sky, split the earth, and slowly cooled into peaks that stand like silent guardians over the island. Their slopes are covered in thick layers of ferns and towering trees. From a distance, the forests look calm and unbroken, yet inside them the world feels alive. Leaves rustle in slow winds, branches drip from the rain that gathers each night. The air carries the scent of damp soil and the distant echo of flowing rivers. As night settles, the mountains glow softly from the moon. Shadows stretch across the valleys. In ancient times, there were no roads here, no paths that cut through the forests. The land was difficult to cross. Deep ravines cut through the hills like scars, and rivers carved their own winding routes toward the sea. In some places, forests grew so dense that only threads of light filtered through the branches. Travelers would have needed patience to move across Flores. They would have learned its rhythms, listened for its warnings, and followed the safest passages. The land demanded that those who lived here adapt. In these valleys, the world feels very far away. Even today, there are places on Flores that feel almost untouched. There are caves hidden within the rocky hills, some only reachable by climbing, others opening wide like ancient gates. Some caves hold deep passageways that stretch back into the earth, where darkness gathers in thick layers. These caves have always been a refuge. They offered safety from storms and predators. They held cool air during the heat of the day and warmth when the nights grew cold. It was in places like these that the small humans of Flores lived. When we imagine early humans, we often picture wide plains and open sky. But on Flores, survival meant navigating a landscape that rose and fell like the waves of the sea. The island shaped everything that lived upon it, including the creatures that would someday puzzle science. Flores is part of a region of Earth known for its isolation. It has always been separated from the larger land masses that connect so much of Asia. Even during ancient times when sea levels were lower and land bridges formed between islands, Flores remained alone. The waters that surrounded it acted like invisible walls. The currents were tricky and unpredictable. The sea itself seemed to guard the island. For hundreds of thousands of years, almost nothing crossed those waters. This isolation is more than a detail. It helped create a world where evolution followed a different rhythm. On large continents, animals and humans moved across wide distances. They encountered new challenges, new environments, and new competitors. But on Flores, life was shaped by what was already there. The rules of survival were written by the island itself, and those rules were very different from the ones that governed the rest of the world. Over long stretches of time, isolation changes living things. Large animals become smaller, so they need less food on an island with limited resources. Small animals sometimes grow larger because they face fewer predators. Scientists call this island effect a kind of natural reshaping. On Flores, this reshaping created animals found nowhere else on Earth. There were tiny elephants that wandered the forests. There were giant storks that hunted along the rivers. There were reptiles that grew larger and stronger than their relatives on other islands. Even today, the famous dragons of Komodo tell part of this ancient story. They are reminders of what the island once held. This strange world existed long before our species arrived on Earth. The first hominins, distant relatives of humans, reached Flores at a time when the planet looked completely different. We do not yet know how they got there. The sea may have carried them on driftwood. They may have crossed the water with simple tools that no longer survive. However, they arrived. Once they stepped onto the island, they entered a world that was already in motion. The land had its own logic. The forests had their own challenges. The rules of life had already been written. For countless generations, early humans lived here in quiet isolation. They adapted to the forests, learned the pathways through the hills, and shaped their lives around the rhythms of the island. They were part of a long history that unfolded far away from the rest of humanity. While other hominin species rose and fell across Eurasia and Africa, Flores remained apart. Its creatures lived without the influence of the wider world. They evolved in slow, quiet steps, guided by the shape of the land and the weight of isolation. Flores became a world where ancient species survived far longer than they should have. It preserved creatures that vanished elsewhere. It shaped bodies, minds, and behavior in ways that seem impossible when compared to the vast continents on which other humans lived. The island created a kind of natural laboratory where evolution took unexpected paths. This is the world where the small humans thrived. The steep ridges, the caves filled with shadows, the forests that held more secrets than sunlight. On Flores, the land itself became a force that shaped life, gently but firmly, over countless years, and for a long time the island kept its wonders hidden. Far into the interior of Flores, beyond the slopes and valleys that fold the land into hidden pockets of green, there is a cave that has watched the slow passage of time. Leang Bua rests at the mouth of a limestone cliff, a quiet opening in the rock that seems almost like an entrance to another world. Travelers who approach it do not see a dramatic gateway. Instead, they find a tall arch of stone, softened by age and weather. The ceiling rises high above the ground, almost cathedral like, as if nature carved it with careful hands over many thousands of years. Light from the outside filters across the cave floor in pale ribbons. Dust hangs in the air like tiny drifting constellations. The ground stretches inward for a great distance, and the deeper one goes, the quieter the world becomes. Footsteps soften, the sound of wind fades. The cave walls grow smooth and cool beneath a layer of mineral deposits that shimmer faintly when touched by light. When scientists first began working within Leang Bua, they expected to find traces of human activity, but nothing more remarkable than the kind that has been found in many ancient shelters around the world. Caves have always been places where the past gathers. Floors become layers of memory. Each layer holds fragments of a life that once moved through the dark, pieces of stone tools, fragments of bone, charcoal from ancient fires, and the dust left behind by countless years. Liang Bua held these memories too. The ground rested on deep sediments that pressed one era upon another. As excavations began, the workers uncovered remnants of ancient hearths that had once glowed beneath the cavern ceiling. The soot had clung to the walls. Fragments of burnt wood had been buried in the soil. The fire marks were faint now, softened by centuries of silence, but their presence was unmistakable. They told a story of warmth and shelter. People had lived here, hidden from storms, protected by stone. At first, nothing seemed unusual about the excavations. The cave was large enough to hold entire communities. Its ceiling arched so high that standing near the entrance gave an impression of being inside a massive hall. The explorers moved slowly, brushing away sediments that had settled over countless years. They uncovered tools, bone fragments, and evidence of repeated human presence. The cave was a home that had been used again and again. Then the soil revealed something that quieted the entire team. It was a skull, a small one, smaller than anyone expected to find in a site so recent in age. The bones that followed seemed delicate, yet they held the unmistakable signs of adulthood. The first thought that crossed the minds of everyone present was simple and practical. Perhaps these were the remains of a modern human whose growth had been stunted. Perhaps disease or deformity had shaped these features. But the cave had more to say. As the excavations continued, more bones appeared from the sediment. Each one told the same story. The proportions were unlike those of any known human. The hands were shaped in unfamiliar ways. The limbs carried traces of strength, but with unusual angles. There was nothing in these bones that matched the skeleton of a modern person. These were not the remains of an individual who had simply been small. The evidence built upon itself layer by layer, just as the sediments had layered the cave floor. Leang Bua became a place where science had to listen closely. What at first seemed like an anomaly became a revelation. The bones were not those of Homo sapiens. They were not the result of illness or deformity. They belonged to a kind of human science had never seen before. The realization changed more than the story of this cave. It changed the way we understand our past. The walls of Leang Bua had held this secret for tens of thousands of years. The high ceiling echoed with the history of a species that should not have survived as long as it did. The floor held traces of fire that had warmed small hands and small bodies. The cave became a witness to a chapter of human evolution that no one expected. It was here that the first clear evidence of Homo floresiensis was found, not as an isolated skeleton, but as part of a world that had existed long after our own species began spreading across the globe. Leang Bua is now one of the most important paleoanthropological sites on Earth. It is a place where the story of human evolution deepened and widened. The cave reminds us that the world once held more than one kind of human. It offers proof that ancient species survived in quiet corners of the planet long after others disappeared. The cave did not reveal its history loudly or suddenly, it simply waited, layer by layer, for someone to listen. Even today, the sediments hold more answers. The high ceiling still gathers its silent dust. The darkness stretches inward, hiding traces of lives that shaped their world within these walls. Leang Bua stands as both shelter and archive, a place where time itself settled gently into the ground. When the small bones of Leang Bua first entered scientific hands, they carried with them a quiet contradiction. They belonged to an adult who had lived and breathed and moved through the forests of Flores, yet their size reminded researchers of a world that did not exist anymore. The skeleton we call LB1 rests at the very center of this story. It is not just another set of ancient remains. It is the body of a human, unlike any other we have ever found. LB1 stands out first because of its stature. When fully grown, this person reached a height no greater than that of a modern child. The entire skeleton measures only a little over 1 meter. The skull is small and rounded. The hands and feet are delicate at a glance, yet built for strength. The body proportions speak of a life shaped by an island that never rewarded size. The bones do not hint at disease or weakness. They speak instead of a body adapted to a particular kind of world. The arms of LB1 were long in relation to the rest of the frame. They reached forward with a span that would have helped in climbing over uneven terrain or gripping branches on steep slopes. The wrists carried an unusual shape. Instead of forming a simple hinge, the bones were angled in a way that reminded scientists of other ancient hominins. These features suggested fluid movement, flexible joints, and hands that could work stone and wood with practiced precision. The legs told a similar story. The feet were flat and broad. They had no strong arch like those of modern humans. The bones of the toes were spread and sturdy. This was not the design of someone who walked across flat plains. It was the design of someone who moved over rough ground, someone who followed paths that rose and dipped across volcanic ridges and forest floors. Flat feet provided balance and stability. They let the body lean into the earth and adjust to the challenges of every step. Scientists had never seen a combination like this before. The skeleton held echoes of ancient hominin species, yet it also belonged to a time when modern humans had already risen. LB1 did not resemble Homo erectus or Neanderthals. It did not match any known group of ancient people. The skull alone raised questions. It was small enough to hold a brain roughly the size of a grapefruit, yet the rest of the bones showed clear signs of intelligence and survival. When researchers compared LB1 to known human fossils, nothing fit the pattern. The body proportions did not match the small humans found in other regions of the world. There was no evidence of dwarfism or developmental conditions. Everything in the bones suggested purpose and adaptation. The skeleton was not an accident of nature. It was a blueprint for a life lived in a specific environment. A body that small would have moved lightly through the forest. The low center of gravity offered balance on uneven ground. The long arms made it easier to climb or reach. The hands could carve stones, shape tools, and gather food. The feet provided stability on slopes and soft soil. The bones spoke of agility rather than strength. They suggested a way of life built on patience and careful movement rather than speed or force. Imagine this person walking across the forests of Flores. The steps would be quiet. The body would lean slightly forward when navigating thick shrubs and undergrowth. The arms would reach for balance. The hands would grip tree bark or stone. The rhythm of movement would be different from our own. It would be closer to the ground, closer to the island itself. LB1 also held surprising signs of resilience. Some bones carried traces of healed injuries. The joints showed wear that came from constant use. These were not fragile bodies. They belonged to a people who lived through storms, watched the rise of rivers, and adapted to the changes of the land. What makes LB1 truly unique is not just the size, it is the combination of features that have never appeared together in any other human skeleton. The skull had ancient traits. The wrist bones resembled those of much older hominins. The feet looked like they had evolved for a world without flat paths or open fields. Yet the tools found near LB1 show a level of planning and skill that belongs to a thinking mind. This skeleton forces us to imagine a different kind of human life, a life that did not depend on height or strength, a life that survived through careful movement, awareness, and knowledge of the land. The proportions of LB1 tell us that Flores shaped the bodies of the people who lived there. Their size was not a disadvantage, it was an adaptation. LB1 does not resemble us, yet it belongs to our story. It reminds us that human history is not a single straight line. It is a collection of shapes and sizes and ideas that changed with the places where people lived. The small frame, the unusual feet, the long arms, and the quiet strength all speak of a world where being human meant something different than it does today. Among all the features that drew scientists toward the skeleton from Leang Bua, none sparked more questions than the size of the skull. It held a brain that would seem impossibly small for a species that lived so recently. In modern human history, we often associate intelligence with size. Bigger minds, we think, must hold deeper thought. Yet here, in the quiet earth of Flores, rested a puzzle that challenged that idea. The brain of LB1 was a fraction of the size we would expect for a creature who shaped tools and hunted in organized patterns. If you held a model of LB1's skull in your hands, it would feel light. The cranial cavity, the hollow space where the brain once rested, had room for a brain no larger than a grapefruit. This is far smaller than the brain of a modern human. In our species, the average brain is several times larger, filling the skull with folds and curves that carry the networks of thought. The ancient humans of Flores lived with far less space for those networks, yet they left behind clear proof of planning and strategy. To understand the scale of this difference, we can look at other species. A chimpanzee, one of our closest living relatives, holds a brain roughly similar in size to LB1. Yet chimpanzees do not build fires or shape stone into blades. They do not plan ahead in ways that leave marks in the archaeological record. Their minds hold instinct, learning, and social bonds, but there is an absence of the deeper pattern making that defines human culture. Modern humans, by comparison, carry a brain that has grown over millions of years. It is the expansion of the prefrontal cortex that often distinguishes us. This area is where we imagine, solve problems, and shape tools with a clear intention. When scientists compared the brain of LB1 to these familiar models, the contrast became impossible to ignore. The brain of the Flores hominin should not have been capable of creating the tools that were found beside it. It should not have been capable of coordinated hunting. It should not have built shelters or planned daily survival strategies. Yet the evidence was there, resting in the same soils that held the bones, blades cut from stone, tools shaped for specific tasks, patterns of wear that showed how they were gripped and used. Each artifact whispered of a mind that understood stone well enough to transform it. LB1's brain, though small, had been directed by something more than instinct. Scientists began to look beyond size. They asked new questions about complexity instead. A brain is not simply a container. It is a network of pathways. Neurons connect in patterns that allow imagination and memory. A smaller brain can carry dense networks if it is shaped to do so. What mattered was not the sheer volume of tissue, but the way it was organized. This idea shifted how researchers saw the Flores remains. The discovery in Leang Bua encouraged a more careful look at what intelligence really means. Brain size had been used as a simple measure of ability for many years. The logic seemed straightforward. Larger animals often have more demands on their senses and movement. They need more coordination and memory. For our species, the growth of the brain seemed linked with the emergence of tools, language, and culture. The skeleton from Flores showed that this pattern did not always hold. Small size did not prevent complexity. Instead, it hinted that intelligence can evolve in forms that defy expectation. There were other clues in the bone. The shape of the skull held traces of an expanded region near the front. This suggested that the parts of the brain that manage planning and decision making may have grown in ways that made up for the smaller size. The features did not match those of chimpanzees. They did not mirror the brain of modern humans either. They stood somewhere between the two, as if shaped by a unique path of evolution. The tools found beside LB1 became the strongest evidence of thought. To shape stone into a blade requires more than strength. It requires imagining a final shape before it exists. It requires understanding how each strike changes the stone and how one wrong move can spoil the pattern. The people of Flores mastered these skills even with brains that looked too small for such knowledge. It was this contradiction that puzzled scientists. It challenged the assumption that intelligence must follow a particular path or a particular size. Some researchers wondered if the people of Flores borrowed this knowledge from others, yet the layers of soil suggested a long history of tool making. The tools were not rare or isolated. They appeared again and again across generations. This was a tradition, not a single moment of learning. It suggested a culture that taught and remembered. The small humans passed knowledge to their children as surely as we pass knowledge today. Would one force science to consider a world where intelligence did not depend on scale? It showed a life where a small brain could still hold imagination and foresight. The brain of this ancient person may have been light in weight, yet it carried the power to shape tools, survive storms, and navigate a landscape that demanded constant awareness. It was less a question of how small a brain can be, and more a question of how that brain was used. In the bones of LB1, the mystery of intelligence found a new voice. It whispered that the human story is not written in size alone. It is written in the pathways of thought, in the hands that shape stone, and in the quiet knowledge that survival comes in many forms. Deep within Leang Bua, where the bones of a small human were first uncovered, there lay another kind of evidence. It did not come in the form of bone or ash. It came in the form of stone, pieces of rock shaped by deliberate hands, left behind like small echoes of the minds that made them. These tools have become just as important as the skeleton they lay beside, because they speak of a skill that seems much larger than the bodies that held it. If you were to pick up one of these stones today, you would feel the weight of a careful act. Many of the tools were blades, shaped from pieces of volcanic rock that were fractured in precise ways. Some were cutting tools, their edges flaked into sharp, uneven teeth. Others were simple flakes chipped away from a larger stone, each one showing where a toolmaker had struck with intention. The tools were not crude or accidental. They were carefully crafted. Stone flaking is one of the earliest technologies humans ever developed. It begins when a person chooses the right piece of rock, often one that breaks in sharp lines rather than unpredictable shards. Then the toolmaker must decide where to hit. Too soft and the stone does not break. Too hard and it will shatter in the wrong direction. The toolmaker judges angle and force. The stone responds with a crack and a split. The flakes fall away. The new surface gleams in the light. Each flake is a step in the transformation of raw material into something useful. The tools in Leang Bua carried the marks of this knowledge. They showed the same patterns of flaking that ancient humans used around the world. The cuts on the stone displayed foresight. The toolmaker knew what the finished shape should be long before the blows were struck. They knew how to create an edge strong enough to cut through tough vegetation or animal hide. They knew how to sharpen a point so that it could pierce or scrape. These were not random chips of rock. They were the work of minds that could imagine a shape before it existed. What makes these tools so striking is not just their form, it is the contradiction they present. They were created by a species that carried a brain smaller than our own, smaller even than many primates. Yet the tools speak of intention, they speak of planning, they speak of a way of thinking that belongs to humans. For a long time, scientists believed that advanced tools appeared only after brain size had increased in early hominins. The tools of Flores showed that this story was not so simple. Some of the blades found in Leang Bua were produced through a technique known as controlled flaking. It is a method that requires a steady hand and a practiced eye. The maker chooses exactly where to strike and how the fracture will travel through the stone. This process produces sharp, thin flakes that can be used for cutting meat or scraping bark. Other tools show signs of retouching, where an edge was sharpened again after use. These marks appear like lines of thought on the surface of the stone. When scientists first uncovered these tools, they questioned their age. They needed to know whether they belonged to the small humans of Flores or to some later group. The soil inside the cave is layered in time. Every layer holds fragments of the past. By measuring the sediments around the tools and the materials within the soil, researchers could determine their age. They used methods that examined tiny particles, the faint traces of minerals altered by light and heat over thousands of years. These techniques allow scientists to understand when a piece of stone was last exposed. The results confirmed that the tools belonged to the same period as the small skeleton. They were not leftovers from another species. They were made by the same people who walked the forests of Flores and lived among the caves. This discovery meant that a human species with a brain far smaller than our own had crafted stone tools with the knowledge and precision once thought impossible for their size. As more tools were uncovered, the patterns became clearer. There were marks of use on the edges. Some stones carried scratches and wear from repeated scraping. Others had been broken and reshaped. The tools formed a sort of record. Each one showed how the makers worked with their environment. They chose volcanic rock because it fractured cleanly. They used hand-sized stones to strike. They left behind tools that were durable and functional. These tools suggest a way of life that required planning each day. They were used to cut plants, prepare food, and build shelters. The people who made them did not rely on instinct alone. They learned by watching and practicing. They passed this knowledge to others. The stone remembers each strike and each decision. It reflects a mind that could anticipate. In the soft light of Leang Bua, the tools rest alongside the bones like a second voice. They tell us that intelligence is not measured by size, it is measured by what is left behind. The blades and flakes speak quietly of hands that shaped them and lives that depended on them. The tools from Flores continue to remind us that human history is filled with surprises, and that even the smallest among us carried the knowledge to reshape the world around them. On Flores, survival was not shaped by the small humans alone. Their world was shared with creatures that had evolved under the same isolation. It was an island where predators and prey formed a quiet struggle for life, each species adapting to a landscape that challenged every step. The people of Flores lived among animals that seem almost mythical when viewed from today. The island was home to giant reptiles, towering birds, and elephants that were small enough to walk through the forests like large deer. In this world, the balance of life was delicate and always shifting. The Komodo dragon is one of the most famous creatures of this region. Even now, it rules the islands that surround Flores. These dragons grew large and strong in the ancient world. They hunted with a patience that came from years of living in a place where every movement mattered. A Komodo dragon does not rush its prey. It watches from the forest edge, waiting for the perfect moment. When it strikes, it uses powerful jaws and sharp teeth to deliver deep wounds. It follows its prey through the trees and across the ground. The prey weakens, the dragon moves closer. There is no need for speed. Time is its ally. Ancient dragons of Flores would have been even larger than some of those alive today. They were built for ambush. Their bodies blended with the earth. Their scales carried the same colors as the rocks and the soil. The people who lived among them would have learned to move quietly. They would have felt the presence of dragons in the rustle of leaves and the silence that settled across the ground. Dragons did not fear the small humans. They saw them as part of the island's web of life. Alongside these great reptiles lived birds unlike any alive today on Flores. There were giant storks with long legs and sharp beaks. These birds were not gentle feeders. They hunted small mammals and even young animals when the opportunity arose. Their wings stretched wide when they moved across the skies. Their shadows passed over the forests like drifting clouds. These birds were predators as capable as any reptile. Their hunting style relied on height and vision. They waited on high ground, then struck with precision. For the people of Flores, the giant storks would have been a constant presence. Their calls echoed through the trees. They fed along the open spaces where the forest thinned. They were drawn to places where the island's prey gathered. Their long beaks were perfect for striking quickly and without warning. The small humans had to share the land with these birds. They watched for the slightest movement of feathers among the branches or the sudden hush of animals fleeing. The island also held a species of elephant, known as the dwarf stegodon. These creatures were unlike the large elephants we know today. They were small enough to move easily through the forests and valleys of Flores. Their bodies were compact, their tusks shorter, yet they remained powerful animals. They traveled in groups. They fed on the vegetation that grew along riverbanks and hills. For the people of Flores, these stegodons were both a source of food and a potential danger. They required careful approach and skilled hunting. The small humans hunted these elephants with the tools they crafted from stone. They watched the movements of the herd. They learned the patterns of the land. When they moved in for the hunt, they did so with knowledge passed down through generations. The elephants would not fall easily. They had strong legs and bodies built to withstand the island's challenges. Yet the people of Flores found a way to survive among them. Together, these animals formed a strange web of life. Each species evolved in response to the others. Dragons hunted the stegodons, storks hunted small mammals and young creatures. The humans found their place between all of them. They learned the ways of the predators. They knew when to keep their distance and when to draw closer. The island shaped their movements and their strategies. The food web of Flores was different from the ones that existed on larger continents. With fewer species, each predator and prey relationship carried more weight. Small changes in the environment could shift the balance. The small humans did not stand apart from this web. They were woven into it. Their survival depended on reading the land and the creatures that lived within it. This world created a kind of pressure that guided evolution. The small humans grew bodies and minds suited to the island. They developed tools and techniques that helped them survive. Their entire existence was a response to the creatures that surrounded them. In time, they found a rhythm that allowed them to live among dragons, birds, and elephants. The island was a place where every species carried the imprint of another. It was a world that reshaped each life that touched it. On Flores, the predators and the prey danced across the land in a quiet struggle. It was a world that tested every step and listened to every sound. Here the small humans lived and endured, shaped by the forces around them. The balance of life continued with each passing season, echoing through the forests and the valleys, reminding us that survival can take many forms. Life on Flores was a quiet contest with the land and the creatures that shared it. The small humans who lived here did not have the height or sheer strength of other ancient species. Their bodies were compact and light. Their brains were smaller than many scientists believed possible for a toolmaker. Yet they survived not for one or two generations, but for tens of thousands of years. Their story is written not in dramatic victories or sudden breakthroughs, but in long endurance. They found a rhythm with the island, and they lived within its rules. Cooperation would have been at the heart of their way of life. A group of small bodies working together would have had an advantage that size alone could not offer. Hunting in these forests was not a matter of speed, it was a matter of patience. The small humans could move through the trees with quiet steps. They watched the paths that animals followed. They waited for the moment when a dwarf stegodon or another prey animal slowed or stumbled. Their survival came from working together, not from acting alone. One can picture them moving as a group along the forest floor. Their eyes searched for tracks in the soft soil. Their ears listened for the crack of branches or the call of a predator. Each person watched a different part of the land. When they found prey, they understood how to approach it. Some would push from behind, others would circle to cut off escape. Their tools were simple but sharp. The stones they carried could cut or scrape. Their hands worked quickly once the animal fell. The hunt was a shared task. Each blow, each movement, each decision supported the group. In their world, fire was not just a tool, it was a companion. Lightning storms swept across the island. Volcanoes burned deep beneath the surface. Fire was part of the landscape, a force that both threatened and protected. The small humans learned to keep fire close. They carried embers from place to place, guarding them as carefully as we might guard water or food. The glow of a small fire kept predators at a distance. Komodo dragons and giant storks did not approach a bright flame. Fire created a circle of safety in a land filled with danger. The people of Flores likely used fire to prepare food. A cooked meal softened tough plants and meat. It allowed them to draw more energy from the calories they ate. This would have been essential for a small body in a world where every moment required awareness. Fire also dried wood and warmed the caves where they slept. The light from the flame cast shadows along the walls, turning stone into a shelter that felt alive. The marks of ancient burning can still be found in the caves of Flores. They speak of nights when the small humans gathered and rested. Caves provided more than protection from storms. They offered a place to store tools, bones, and memories. Leang Bua was only one of many such shelters. The caves were natural refuges. They kept out rain and heat. Their walls held the cool air of the mountains. These spaces allowed the small humans to listen to the island breathe. They could hear the wind move through the trees. They could hear the calls of animals that lived beyond the entrance. Inside these caves, the people of Flores left traces of their long presence. Layers of sediment built up over centuries. Each layer held something different. Some contained fragments of tools, others held the remains of meals. Pieces of bone lay beside chips of stone. The deeper the archaeologist dug, the more evidence appeared. The caves had been used again and again. They were places of return. Long-term habitation is not simply a matter of shelter. It is a sign of continuity. The small humans did not drift across the island without purpose. They knew which places offered the most security. They knew which valleys held water and which forests hid predators. They returned to the same caves even when the world around them changed. This suggests a deeper relationship with the land. It was not just a place to survive, it was a home. The environment was always shifting. Volcanoes erupted, rivers changed their course, the forests grew thick, then thinned, then grew again. The small humans adapted to each change. They found new paths when old ones disappeared. They learned the habits of predators and prey as they evolved. Over time, they built a life that fit into the island's patterns. In this world, survival was a constant work of observation and care. The small humans used the land and its resources in ways that balanced risk and reward. They hunted together, they shared fire, they sheltered in caves that protected them from the storms of the island. Their endurance came from finding a quiet harmony with the world around them. Flores was not an easy place to live, yet the small humans did not vanish at the first sign of challenge. They stayed for thousands of years, shaping their lives around the island's demands. In their footsteps, we find a reminder that survival is often a slow and subtle skill. It is not always the strongest who endure, but those who learn how to live within the world that surrounds them. For a long time, scientists believed the timeline of human evolution was simple. One ancient species would rise, then fade away, clearing space for the next. Each new form of human would inherit the world left behind by the older ones. It was a slow procession across time, a familiar story of step-by-step replacement. The discovery on Flores changed that story. The small humans of the island survived, not in the distant shadows of prehistory, but until a time that touches the lives of modern humans far more closely than anyone expected. Evidence from the cave floor and the soil that held the bones suggests that these small humans were still alive as recently as 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. Written out like this, those numbers sound almost unreal. They belong to a world that feels ancient, yet they sit so near to the age of our own kind. At that same time, modern humans moved across distant plains and crossed seas. Our ancestors were carving symbols into caves and shaping spears sharp enough to bring down mammoths. The small humans of Flores were living their own lives beneath the volcanic ridges of their island, unaware that the wider world was changing. This period of 50,000 to 60,000 years ago is when many branches of humanity were alive at once. In Europe, the Neanderthals were still breathing cold air, building shelters, and watching the migration of herds. Far to the east, the Denisovans moved across the high mountains and forests of Asia. Their presence is known not through complete bodies, but through fragments of bone and tiny pieces of DNA that hint at a sophisticated world. Modern humans had already crossed much of the planet. They lived in Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. These three species, and perhaps more, walked the earth at the same moment in time. It is difficult to imagine a world with so many human forms at once. Each species carried its own traditions. Each species knew the land in different ways. Their shapes and bodies reflected the places they came from. The Neanderthals carried heavy bones and powerful arms. The Denisovans seemed built for mountain life. Modern humans had tools carved from bone and ideas that stretched across generations. Among them all existed the small humans of Flores. Their bodies were shaped by isolation. Their minds held knowledge of caves and forests. They survived on an island that offered danger and shelter in equal measure. When scientists realized these timelines overlapped, something shifted in the study of human evolution. The story was no longer one of clear replacement. It became a tangled path. How could a species with such a small brain live until a time when other humans had already developed advanced tools, languages, and networks? The timeline suggested that intelligence did not rise in a single straight line. It came in waves and branches. It adapted to each landscape. This creates a kind of evolutionary contradiction. For many decades, scientists believed that only one human species could survive at a time. They thought the success of modern humans came from an advantage in thinking and planning. Yet here was proof that another kind of human lived through the same era. They endured harsh environments and dangerous predators. They built tools that belonged to a world of thought and intention. They survived without becoming large in stature or brain. This contradiction raises questions about what it means to be human. If different human species lived at the same moment, what separated them? It was not size. The small humans of Flores were no taller than a modern child. It was not strength. The Neanderthals carried powerful shoulders and could withstand cold winters. It was not even geography. Human species moved across continents and islands. They lived in mountains and in forests, in caves and across open plains. The survival of the small humans until this late point in time reminds us that evolution does not follow a single direction. It branches, merges, and sometimes loops back on itself. The island of Flores preserved a lineage that the wider world had forgotten. It held on to a form of humanity long after other species vanished. The small humans were contemporaries of our ancestors, even if the ocean kept them apart. Scientists do not yet understand how many times different human species met or interacted. In some places, bones show evidence that Neanderthals and modern humans lived near one another, shared resources, and perhaps even exchanged knowledge. In other places, the story is silent. The small humans of Flores leave no signs of contact with other species. Their island remained a world unto itself. This timeline forces us to step back and see our history with new eyes. The past was not a place of clear boundaries, it was a world filled with overlapping lives. The small humans of Flores survived long after the age we once thought belonged only to larger species. Their presence in this late period shows that evolution does not erase everything that came before. Sometimes it preserves the rare and the unexpected. The timeline of Flores challenges the story we used to tell. It asks us to imagine a world where many forms of humanity shared the earth, each shaped by different conditions. It tells us that survival can come in many shapes, and that the history of our species is more complex than we once believed. There is a point in the story of Flores where the record simply fades away. It does not end with a battle or a final struggle. It does not leave behind a field of broken bones. It does not even whisper through the soil. The small humans who lived on the island for so many thousands of years simply vanish from the archaeological record. Their presence, once so clear in stone and fire and bone, becomes a silence that scientists still struggle to understand. Archaeologists expect disappearance. Most species eventually leave the earth. The ancient world is filled with extinctions and endings, but there is something different about what happened on Flores. Usually, when a species vanishes, it leaves behind a trace. Fossils gather in layers of sediment. Bones collect in caves. Mass die-offs leave clear patterns in the ground. Even when there is no violence, the earth keeps a memory of those who have passed. With the small humans of Flores, the story seems to dissolve without a clear final chapter. The bones that once appeared in the caves and valleys stop appearing. The tools stop accumulating in the soil. The fire marks begin to fade. Layer after layer of sediment shows no sign of their presence. It is as though the island simply drew a line in time, and everything that came after belonged to another world. Such clean silence is rare. Most species leave a trace of their end, even if the details are hard to read. For the Flores hominins, the absence itself has become one of the greatest mysteries. There are no piles of remains that suggest a sudden famine. There are no burned layers or broken shelters that might speak of conflict. There are no clear signs of disease or infestation. The disappearance does not look like a collapse. It looks like a fading. Scientists have searched for clues in the sediments of Leang Bua and other caves. They have sifted through layers of volcanic ash and ancient dust. The deeper they look, the more clear the pattern becomes. For thousands of years, the small humans hunted, built fires, and used tools. Then the record stops. Later layers show the presence of modern humans. The two worlds do not overlap in the soil of the cave. One ends just before the other begins. There are several ideas about what might have happened. One hypothesis suggests that the small population of humans on Flores reached a point where it could no longer sustain itself. On an island with limited resources, even a small population can become vulnerable. A severe drought or a shift in the availability of food could have tipped the balance. If the population dropped below a certain number, recovery would have been difficult. This idea speaks to the quiet fragility of island life. Another possibility looks outward rather than inward. It suggests that the arrival of modern humans might have brought new pressures. Competition for resources can create tension even when there is no violence. The larger species might have claimed the best caves or the most fertile hunting grounds. They might have unknowingly brought unfamiliar diseases. The small humans of Flores may have been outcompeted in ways that left no trace of direct conflict. The silence in the cave layers could reflect a slow shift in who lived on the island. Environmental change is also written into the island's history. Flores is shaped by the movements of tectonic plates and the breath of volcanoes. A single eruption could alter the landscape in ways that affect the entire ecosystem. Rivers could change their course, forests could burn, prey animals might vanish. If the small humans relied on particular patterns of land and water, a sudden change could have disrupted their survival. The island may have shifted beneath their feet. There is another idea, quieter and more subtle. It looks at the nature of the archaeological record itself. Bones decay, tools can be buried beyond reach, entire communities can disappear without leaving much behind. Time does not preserve everything equally. In some places, the earth holds memories with care. In others, it washes them away. It is possible that the bones of the small humans still rest somewhere on Flores, hidden in caves or beneath the forest floor. We simply have not found them. Whichever explanation holds the truth, the disappearance of the small humans remains unusual. It defies the patterns we expect. It reminds us that our understanding of extinction is incomplete. A species that lived for thousands of years, that hunted and made tools and shared fire, can slip away quietly. The end does not always come with a clear mark. Sometimes it comes as a slow fading, a gentle retreat into the earth. The silence of Flores continues to echo through the study of human evolution. It is a reminder that history is filled with stories that end not in noise, but in stillness. The small humans left behind caves of stone, tools of sharp rock, and a record of life written in the layers of time. Then they left nothing more. Their world remains hidden in the hush of the island, waiting for the day when the earth reveals more of what happened in that final chapter. The forests of ancient Flores were more than just a backdrop to survival. They were the world that shaped every breath and every step taken by the small humans who lived there. When we look at the island today, we still see hints of that ancient world. Tall trees rise from the ground, their roots gripping the soil like fingers holding the earth in place. Thick layers of leaves filter the sunlight into soft fragments. The air is heavy with moisture, and the sound of insects moves like a quiet pulse in the background. These are the forests that held entire lifetimes. On Flores thousands of years ago, the trees grew in dense formations. Their trunks rose high into the sky, and their branches intertwined to form a canopy. Sunlight passed through the leaves in patterns that shifted with every breeze. The ground beneath was covered in moss and fallen branches. Ferns grew in wide spirals. The forest floor was alive with the movement of small animals and insects. It was a world that seemed to breathe, In this environment, the small humans found a home. Their bodies were suited to moving through narrow spaces and climbing over uneven ground. They walked softly over damp earth. Their feet felt the subtle changes in the soil. They knew the hidden paths between the trees and the places where roots created natural steps. The forests were full of life, and every plant carried a meaning. Some plants offered food, others carried medicine, still others warned of danger. The island offered a variety of edible plants that the small humans learned to harvest. Some grew low to the ground, with broad leaves that could be peeled away to reveal edible roots. These roots could be cooked in the heat of a shared fire or eaten raw when food was scarce. There were fruits that ripened with the seasons. They appeared in bright colors and soft textures. The small humans gathered them when the time was right. They shared the harvest with their group. Flowers bloomed in the canopy and dropped petals onto the forest floor. Their scents drifted through the air and mixed with the smell of moist soil. These flowers attracted insects and birds. The small humans knew when to avoid the places where bees nested. They listened to the buzzing of wings and understood the rhythm of the forest. Some plants held healing properties. Their leaves could soothe wounds or reduce pain. Knowledge of these plants was passed carefully from one generation to the next. The forest itself became a storehouse of memory. The weather on Flores shifted between wet and dry seasons. When the rains came, they fell with force. Water flowed through the forest, creating streams and pools. The humidity wrapped around every living thing. It clung to skin and filled the air with a warmth that felt almost alive. The small humans adapted to this cycle. They knew when to stay near shelter and when to move deeper into the trees. The rains nourished the plants they relied upon. The dry seasons revealed the paths they followed. The forests were not always quiet. The call of birds echoed across the treetops. Their voices carried warnings and signals. The rustling of leaves revealed the movement of larger animals. Insects created a steady sound, like a whisper that never faded. When night arrived, the forest changed its voice. The darkness filled with new sounds. The chirping of night insects and the distant call of unseen creatures carried through the air. The small humans built fires near the caves during these hours. The flames cast shadows on the forest floor. The warmth of the fire pushed back the night. Light behaved differently in the forests of Flores. The canopy filtered the sun into soft beams. Sometimes the light glowed golden, spreading warmth across the trees. At other times it was pale and cool, revealing the details of bark and leaves. The light danced across the ground in patches. It shifted with the breeze. The small humans noticed these changes. They used the shifting light to guide their movements. The forest taught them how to read time by the way the shadows moved. The plants of Flores created a world rich with resources. Some roots could be boiled for their starch. Some leaves could be wrapped around food and placed near the fire. Berries grew deep within the forest. They offered sweetness when other food was scarce. The small humans gathered these with care. They watched the behavior of birds and animals to learn where the best plants grew. The forest was a teacher and a provider. The sensory landscape of Flores was constant. The smell of wet soil, the touch of moss beneath bare feet, the sound of water and birds, the taste of wild fruit, the sight of sunlight moving through the leaves. The small humans lived in this world every day. Their minds were shaped by these forests. Their bodies were shaped by the land they called home. In that world, the boundaries between shelter and wilderness were soft. The forest was both a refuge and a challenge. It was a place where danger and abundance existed side by side. The small humans learned how to move through it with skill and patience. They relied on the forest for everything they needed: food, water, shelter, knowledge. The world they inhabited was woven from trees and roots, light and shadow, sound and silence. It was a world that shaped them and held their footsteps. It was the forest that offered them a place to live, to hunt, and to rest. It was the forest that carried their memories long after they were gone. Each day on Flores began with the land itself. The island was never still, even when the air seemed quiet and the trees swayed only gently. The earth beneath the forest floor held a deeper movement. Ancient volcanic forces shaped every slope and valley. The small humans who lived here learned to read the landscape as carefully as we read maps today. They knew where the earth rose sharply and where the rock held its strength. Their daily life was a constant conversation with the island. The slopes of volcanoes stretched across Flores like frozen waves. Some were covered in dense forests. Others were bare and rocky, shaped long ago by fire and ash. The small humans moved across these slopes with a patience that came from generations of experience. They followed ridges and natural pathways worn into the land. Their small frames made it possible to climb steep areas that larger bodies would struggle with. The volcanic soil shifted beneath their feet, sometimes soft and crumbly, other times hardened into smooth stone. Living in a volcanic world meant listening to signs. The ground could tremble without warning, the air could thicken with heat and the smell of sulfur. The small humans learned to sense the slightest change in the wind or the way leaves moved on the branches. Their survival depended on attention. They knew which paths were safe and which areas held hidden dangers. They followed the routes that their ancestors had traveled before them, paths that wound between rock faces and crossed shallow streams. In the wetter seasons, water flowed down from the volcanic slopes, creating rivers and pools in the valleys. These were places of abundance. The small humans gathered at the water sources to drink, wash, and find food. The rivers carried fish and plants. The streams were cool and clear. They offered a brief relief from the heat of the forest. But water was not always so plentiful. During the dry seasons, the island changed. Streams slowed to a trickle. The air grew hotter and heavier. The small humans adapted by knowing where water remained, even when the land seemed parched. Some water sources were hidden beneath rocks or nestled in deep forest coves. The small humans discovered these places through careful observation. They watched the behavior of animals and followed the trails left by deer and other creatures. They understood the patterns of rainfall and the flow of water across the land. When the dry season arrived, they traveled between these sources with deliberate steps. The presence of water shaped their movement across the island. Travel across Flores was never random. It followed the logic of the land. Paths connected caves and rivers, hunting grounds and safe resting places. The small humans moved in groups, never isolated. Their footsteps followed patterns, shaped by knowledge passed through generations. In the mornings, they set out to forage for food. They gathered fruits that ripened in the canopy, roots that grew deep beneath the soil, and leaves that carried nourishment. They understood which plants could be eaten raw and which needed to be softened by heat. Their travels were timed by the seasons. During the wetter months when food was plentiful, they stayed near the rivers and streams. They rested in caves or beneath natural overhangs. During the dry months when the forest held its breath, they ventured farther, following trails that brought them to the best sources of food and water. Their foraging patterns created a rhythm that echoed the shape of the island itself. The volcanic slopes were not just barriers. They offered a vantage point. From high ground, the small humans could see across valleys and forests. They could watch the movement of animals and the approach of predators. They could sense the changes in the weather. The slopes became guides for daily decisions. Which direction to travel, when to rest, when to hunt. The forests at the base of the volcanoes held abundant life. The thick vegetation offered shelter from the sun and provided food. The small humans knew how to move quietly across the forest floor. Their light bodies allowed them to step across rocks and roots without making noise. Their long arms helped them climb over obstacles. Their feet pressed softly into the soil. Their daily life was a balance of caution and resourcefulness. They traveled through landscapes that shifted with rain and heat. They searched for food in places that required skill and memory. The volcanic slopes offered danger and safety at the same time. The river valleys offered water and life. The forest paths offered routes through the densest parts of the island. There is a quiet beauty in imagining their footsteps across this land. They lived with the awareness that the island could change from gentle to harsh in a moment. They adapted by learning its language. They taught their children which plants to gather and which paths led to water. They shared knowledge about the safest routes across the slopes. Every day, they faced the challenges of the island and found ways to move across it. Their lives were shaped by the land they called home. They did not conquer the island. They lived in harmony with it. The volcanic slopes and forest trails held their stories. Their movements were guided by the cycles of water and the patterns of the seasons. The landscape was both their challenge and their refuge. It shaped their days and held their history within its soil. Among the most surprising discoveries on Flores are the remains of the dwarf stegodon, the small elephants that once roamed the island. Their bones hold a quiet record of what life demanded from the tiny humans who shared the land with them. These elephants were not as towering as the giants that walked other parts of the world, yet they were still powerful animals. They could move quickly across the forest floor. They could charge when threatened. They were not prey that could be taken without thought or planning. The clues of these ancient hunts lie in the details left behind. Archaeologists have found bones of dwarf stegodons marked with fine, deliberate cuts. These markings are not the scratches of scavengers. They are precise. They show where stone tools sliced through tendons and muscle. They tell a story of a careful process that unfolded after the animal fell. The small humans knew how to remove flesh from bone. They understood how to use every part of the animal. The pattern of cuts suggests that the work was shared. Many hands, many blades, each one placed with intention. Hunting a dwarf elephant on an island as rugged as Flores required more than strength, it required strategy. The small humans may have watched the movements of the herds and waited for the right moment. Perhaps they targeted the young or the weak, animals that lagged behind or wandered too far from the group. The forest offered hiding places. The slopes offered vantage points. The small humans worked with the landscape rather than against it. There are signs that they may have used simple traps or natural barriers to assist in the hunt. A deep ravine could serve as a boundary. A steep slope could slow the movement of an elephant. The people of Flores would have understood these features well. They did not need large weapons to bring down their prey. They needed only to lead the stegodon into a place where it could not escape easily. Once trapped or slowed, the group could move in closer. Some researchers imagine a coordinated effort. One group might distract the animal, drawing its attention. Another group might wait in silence nearby. The stone tools they carried were sharp enough to cut through hide and muscle. The final strike did not need to be powerful. It only needed to be well placed. The hunt itself may have been slow. The small humans did not rush. They moved with the patience that came from generations of living on an island where every decision carried weight. After the hunt, the work continued. The dwarf stegodon offered more than meat. Its bones could be used for shelter or tools. Its hide could be dried. Its fat could be burned. The process of butchering the animal may have taken hours. The marks on the bones suggest an understanding of the body's structure. The small humans worked carefully, preserving as much as possible. Near the remains of these animals, there is evidence that the meat was cooked. The fire marks and burnt fragments tell a quiet story of shared meals. The small humans may have roasted pieces of meat over open flames. They may have used heated stones to prepare the food. The warmth of the fire softened the meat and made it easier to eat. Cooking also reduced disease and made nutrients more available. It was another way the small humans adapted to their world. The presence of fire near the remains suggests that these hunts were not simply moments of survival, they were moments of community. The group gathered around the fire, sharing food that came from a shared effort. Children learned by watching. Adults passed down knowledge in silence and movement. The warmth of the flames kept predators at a distance. The light cast shadows on the surrounding trees. The smell of cooked meat drifted through the forest. These hunts underlined something important about life on Flores. The small humans were not passive participants in the island's food web. They were active. They shaped their surroundings. They found a way to bring down animals larger than themselves by working together. The dwarf elephants were part of their diet for thousands of years. Their bones appear in the same layers of sediment as the tools and fire marks. This record of hunting also reveals a deeper understanding of timing and opportunity. The small humans did not hunt constantly. They waited for the right conditions. They watched the movements of the herds and the changes in the seasons. The forest held its own rhythm. The stegodons followed pathways to water and food. The small humans followed those patterns and learned where to find the animals. In imagining their hunts, we imagine a world where knowledge was not written down, but lived through experience. The forest, the rivers, and the volcanic slopes all played a part. The small humans listened to the land, moved with its shape, and adapted their strategies. The cut marks on bones and the evidence of fire speak of a species that understood its place within the island. The dwarf elephant was both a challenge and a resource. The small humans rose to meet that challenge with skill and care. The remains they left behind show a world where survival was not defined by size, but by ingenuity and cooperation. Their hunts were acts of deep connection with the land and with each other. Life on Flores was shared with powerful predators, and none were more feared or respected than the dragons. These ancient lizards were masters of patience and stealth. Their bodies blended with the earth, and their movements were too quiet for such heavy creatures. The small humans understood these reptiles better than any book or fossil can show. Their survival depended on knowing where the dragons waited, how they hunted, and when to move away before danger arrived. The dragons did not chase their prey across long distances. They stalked with slow and silent steps. They watched from tall grass or rested beside the trails that animals followed to reach water. Their hunting strategy relied on timing and surprise. A sudden lunge, a powerful bite. They did not need to kill immediately. A wounded animal would weaken over time. The dragons learned to follow patiently, letting exhaustion finish what their teeth began. The small humans observed these patterns over generations. They knew the places where the dragons lingered. They noticed the trails worn into the earth by these predators. They saw the signs of disturbance in the leaves and the shifts in the silence of the forest. Avoiding the dragons became a matter of reading the land. The small humans did not travel blindly. They moved with awareness. When they crossed the island, they followed paths that kept them away from riverbanks and open fields during certain times of day. Behavioral patterns shaped every decision. The dragons were most active at dusk and dawn. In the heat of midday, they were slower. Their bodies needed the sun to warm them. The small humans took advantage of this rhythm. They foraged at times when the dragons rested. They crossed risky areas when sunlight was strong and shadows were shorter. At night, when the forest filled with the sounds of insects and darkness covered the land, the small humans stayed close to safety. Shelter played an important role in staying safe. Caves were not only places to sleep, but places that provided strong protection from predators. The entrance of a cave narrowed the world to a single point. A dragon could not sneak in unnoticed. The small humans chose locations where they could build fires and watch the outside from a safe distance. The walls of stone reflected heat and kept the night air warm. Inside, the darkness was familiar and predictable. Some shelters were temporary. The small humans learned to use natural overhangs and rock formations when they needed to sleep away from home. These places were chosen with care. They were often high above ground level or tucked into places where dragons could not easily reach. Small ledges and narrow openings became bedrooms. The small humans curled together for warmth. They rested in close groups. Their sleep was light. Their ears listened for the subtle signals of danger. Fire was not simply a tool for cooking, it was a guardian. The flames created a barrier of light and heat. Dragons avoided open fire. The smell of smoke and the glow of the flames kept them at a distance. The small humans understood this well. They placed their fires near the entrance of caves or along the edges of their sleeping places. The blaze did not need to be large. Even a small fire flickering against stone walls offered safety. When traveling at night, they carried burning wood or glowing embers. A single spark of fire was enough to signal danger to any watching predator. The dragons recognized fire from a distance. They turned away from its warmth. For the small humans, fire was a constant companion. It allowed them to walk through the forest when darkness made the world feel closer and more uncertain. There are traces of these sleeping patterns still visible in the archaeological record. In some caves, the remnants of repeated fires show how often the small humans returned. The ash and burnt wood are layered deep into the sediments. These layers are like pages in a book. They show where the small humans made their beds and how they placed their fires. They show which corners of the cave became places of rest. Avoiding dragons was a balance between caution and confidence. The small humans did not fear their world in a way that paralyzed them. They adapted, they moved differently. Their daily habits respected the presence of the great reptiles. They learned to watch for the signs that a dragon had passed. Sometimes it was the shape of footprints in the soil. Sometimes it was the way birds fell silent. Sometimes it was the scent of the animal itself, a faint musk that lingered in the air. Even in their small size, the humans of Flores were not helpless. They shaped their behavior around the rhythm of the land. They stayed close to the walls of caves. They built fires to create light and warmth. They traveled in groups. They watched and listened. Their survival was built on an understanding that the island belonged to many creatures, each one searching for a way to live, and so they lived side by side with the dragons. Each species moved through the same forests and across the same slopes. Each followed patterns shaped by instinct and experience. The small humans did not defeat the dragons. They did not eliminate them or drive them away. Instead, they learned to share the land in quiet balance. The dragons remained feared and respected, and the small humans continued to survive beneath the canopy of the island's ancient trees. In the deep histories of Flores, the bones of the small humans tell us more than just their physical form. They also whisper of the relationships that tied them together. Archaeologists do not only look for evidence of tools or food or shelter, they listen to the bones for signs of how these ancient people treated one another. The evidence that remains suggests that the small humans did not live isolated lives. They lived in groups, shared tasks, and cared for one another in ways that reveal a rich and quiet world of community. Among the most striking pieces of evidence are bones that healed. When a bone breaks, it carries the mark of that injury long after the person has recovered. Scientists have found fossils where fractures mended over time. These broken bones tell a story of care. A fractured limb cannot be used for hunting or climbing. A person with such an injury would have needed help to move, gather food, and stay safe. The fact that these bones show full healing means that the injured individuals did not face their recovery alone. Healing is a slow process. It requires rest and a safe place. It requires food and protection. These signs show that the small humans provided these things. They did not abandon their injured. They stayed together and helped one another survive. This simple fact tells us that there was a sense of responsibility among them. It was not strength alone that carried them through the island's many dangers. It was also the strength of connection. The bones also help us imagine the size of their groups. The caves and shelters where their remains have been found hold fragments of several individuals. Layers of sediment reveal repeated use of the same sites over many years. These patterns suggest that the small humans lived in small but stable communities. Perhaps a dozen individuals shared a shelter, perhaps a few more traveled together. These groups were large enough to offer protection, but small enough to move quickly through the forest. The size of the community shaped daily life. In a small group, each person carried an important role. Some individuals may have been skilled at making tools, others may have been better at climbing or tracking prey. The children learned by watching and copying. Elders shared knowledge of plants, water sources, and safe pathways. Together they formed a network of skill and memory that allowed them to survive. There are marks on bones that suggest social rituals. Some remains show signs that bodies were placed with care after death. The small humans did not simply leave their dead in the open forest. They chose places of shelter. They arranged bodies near the places where they lived. These choices speak of closeness. Death did not erase a person's place in the community. Even in loss, there was care. The distribution of tools and food remains also hints at cooperation. Archaeologists have found evidence that multiple hands worked together during hunts and the preparation of food. Cut marks on stegodon bones show that the process of butchering was not done by a single person. It was shared. There are signs of multiple stone tools used on the same piece of meat. This suggests that the small humans gathered as a group to complete tasks. The small humans likely shared food in a way that protected the young, the weak, and the injured. Bones from old individuals suggest they lived long enough to gain experience and wisdom. These elders would have passed on knowledge of the land and the rhythms of the seasons. Their presence in the community suggests a structure where age and strength were valued differently than they are today. Survival was a collaborative effort. There is also evidence of diversity within the group. Bones show different ages. Some are from children, others from adults. There are signs of males and females, each offering a different role in the daily life of the community. The presence of children means families live together. The presence of older adults means they valued longevity. The community held together across generations. From these small fossils, we learn that the small humans of Flores lived in a world held together by touch and memory. They shared the tasks of survival, guided by mutual care. Their bones tell us more than the shape of their bodies. They reveal the shape of their relationships. They tell us that these ancient people knew how to live in groups, how to help one another, and how to carry each other through difficult times. The island of Flores was a place that demanded cooperation. The forest, the predators, the volcanic slopes, and the scarcity of resources all shaped their daily lives. Yet the small humans did not face these challenges alone. Their bones carry the evidence of kindness, support, and protection. They show that the story of humanity is not only about tools and hunting and fire, it is also about the threads of connection that hold a community together. As night settled over the forests of Flores, a new world emerged. The light faded, shadows lengthened, and the island's predators awoke. The dragons stirred in the darkness. The giant birds rested in tall trees or stood silently near riverbanks. The calls of smaller animals echoed through the forest as they searched for water and food. In this world of darkness, the small humans of Flores held a quiet advantage. They carried with them an ancient discovery that transformed their nights into something less dangerous. They carried fire. The power of fire begins with something simple, a spark, a flame that reaches into the air. Yet this tiny light held the force to change everything. The small humans of Flores learned to tame fire, feeding it with leaves and wood until it became steady and warm. They brought fire wherever they traveled, treating it almost as a living companion. When the darkness came, it was fire that kept them safe. The flames flickered against the stone walls of their shelters. They cast dancing light on the forest floor and turned night into a place that felt less unknown. Fire was not only a shield, it was a tool that reshaped every part of life. Some scientists believe the small humans used controlled burning to shape the environment around them. By tending small fires along the forest's edge, they cleared pathways for safe travel. These controlled burns kept vegetation from becoming too dense. They may have encouraged certain plants to grow in predictable patterns. Fire helped them guide the land's growth, influencing where animals walked and where food plants would thrive. Cooking is one of the most remarkable uses of fire. The small humans discovered that placing food near the flame changed it. Tough meat softened, hard roots became easier to chew and digest. The heat from the fire made food safer. It destroyed harmful bacteria and reduced the energy needed for eating. This meant they could gain more nourishment from the same meal. Cooking was not merely a matter of taste, it became a part of survival. Imagine a group of small humans gathered near a fire after a long day of traveling across volcanic slopes and forest trails. The flames warmed their bodies and dried their clothes. A piece of meat rested near the embers, slowly changing color and texture. The scent of cooked food filled the air. Children watched the flames with wide eyes. Adults shared stories or rested in silence. Fire brought the community together and made the night feel less like a threat. Fire also changed the balance of power between the small humans and the predators that stalked the island. The dragons avoided open flames. The glow of a fire warned them that prey was protected. The heat and light interrupted their hunting strategies. Even the giant birds, which hunted during the day, avoided areas lit by fire. The small humans were safer simply by keeping the fire burning. It gave them control over the night. The archaeological record supports this story. Layers of cave sediment hold traces of burning that were not caused by lightning or natural events. The patterns show repeated use of fire in the same places. The small humans returned to these locations often. They tended the fire carefully. They placed it in strategic spots within the shelter. Some fires were small and controlled, meant only for warmth or light. Others were used for cooking or crafting tools. Each one reveals a deeper understanding of the power of flame. The presence of fire in their lives suggests a more advanced level of communication. Fire had to be shared, protected, and passed on. One person might carry burning wood from place to place. Another might gather fuel. The group worked together to keep the flames alive. This shared responsibility strengthened their bond and allowed them to travel across dangerous terrain with greater confidence. Fire did more than keep them safe. It changed the way they used time. During the day, the small humans hunted, gathered, and moved across the land. At night, fire allowed them to continue important tasks. They shaped tools by the light of the flames. They cooked meals that nourished their bodies. They shared knowledge with one another. Fire extended the day and shortened the night's danger. It is easy to imagine how different their nights would have been without this tool. The predators moved silently through the darkness. The forest held unknown sounds and hidden threats. Yet the small humans sat beside firelight, watching the flames flicker, feeling warmth against their skin. Fire added a layer of safety to the world. It turned the night from a place of fear into a place of rest. Fire was more than a simple tool. It was a force that changed their relationship with the land. It shaped their movement across the island. It supported their survival in a world filled with predators and uncertainty. The presence of fire marks moments of skill and wisdom. It tells us that these small humans understood more than we once believed. They carried within them the knowledge of how to use flame for food, safety, and community. As the flames burned bright against the darkness, fire became their greatest ally. It created a circle of light that held back the dangers of the night and allowed life to continue beyond the setting sun. Long before the small humans disappeared from Flores, the island itself carried a deep and unpredictable force. Beneath the surface lay rivers of molten rock that shifted and pressed against the crust. The land was never steady. It rose and fell with the heartbeat of volcanoes. These hidden forces shaped the island's mountains, carved the steep ridges, and set the pattern for forests and rivers. The small humans lived in this world not as visitors, but as witnesses to the quiet movements beneath their feet. Volcanoes have their own rhythms. Some breathe slowly, taking centuries to show any sign of change. Others rumble and hiss with more frequent activity. Flores was marked by cycles of eruptions. These eruptions varied in scale. Some threw ash into the air and scattered it across the forest like a gray snowfall. Others were powerful enough to reshape valleys and bury entire landscapes. Generations of small humans grew up knowing that the island could shift without warning. The rhythms of these eruptions were woven into daily life. Even when no explosion came, the volcanoes sent out small signals. Tremors shook the ground. Sudden heat rose from vents that opened in unexpected places. Streams of warm water trickled down slopes after rains. The small humans likely learned to read these signs. They knew the places where the earth felt thin and fragile. They avoided the areas where gas seeped from the soil. They listened to the land as closely as they listened to the movement of animals and the rustle of leaves. Scientists have found evidence that one particularly powerful eruption occurred around 50,000 years ago. This eruption did not simply scatter ash across the land. It left a signature in the layers of sediment that settled in caves and valleys. Thick deposits of ash can still be seen in the ground today. The layers form a pale band in the soil, like a memory of the moment when the island changed. These ash layers tell the story of an event that shook the entire region. This eruption would have been devastating. Ash clouds could have stretched across the sky and blocked the sunlight. Forests would have been smothered beneath the weight of falling ash. Water sources could have become contaminated. Animals would have struggled to find food. The small humans who lived in this world would have faced a new kind of challenge. The island that had supported them for so long became a place of danger. The effects of such an eruption reach far beyond the moment it happens. The land changes in the years that follow. Plants may struggle to return. Prey animals may leave or die. Predators may grow more desperate. The small humans who survived the initial event would have needed to adapt quickly. They would have searched for food in places where the ash was thin. They would have sought shelter in caves that protected them from falling debris. They would have relied on the skills that carried them through countless generations. Ash is a storyteller in its own way. It settles in layers that do not easily disappear. Inside Leang Bua and other caves on Flores, archaeologists have found these ash layers preserved beneath younger sediments. The layers hold fragments of charcoal, pieces of stone tools, and bones of animals that lived before and after the eruption. These clues show that life continued on Flores after the explosion. The small humans returned to the caves and left new traces of their presence. Yet the changes in the environment may have weakened their world. Some researchers believe that this major eruption contributed to the decline of the small humans. The island's delicate balance of predators and prey was disrupted. Water sources became scarce. Vegetation changed. The population of small humans may have been reduced. On an island where every life depended on cooperation and adaptation, even a small decrease in population could have had lasting consequences. The eruption itself may not have caused their disappearance. Instead, it may have created a chain of events that placed new pressures on the small humans. The forests they knew so well were altered. The animals they hunted moved or died. The patterns of travel and foraging shifted. The caves that once provided refuge became crowded or unsafe. The ash that settled into the ground carried more than the memory of fire. It carried the possibility that life on Flores changed forever. Volcanoes have always shaped the story of this island. They built the mountains and carved the valleys. They created the fertile soil that allowed plants to grow. They also brought moments of destruction. The small humans learned to live with this dual nature. They survived countless eruptions. They adapted to the landscape that rose around them. Yet one eruption stood out. Its ash settled like a marker in time, a reminder of the island's power. These volcanic forces remain part of Flores today. The caves still hold the layers of ash that speak of ancient fire. The ridges still carry the scars of past eruptions. The island remembers. It remembers the small humans who walked its slopes and slept within its caves. It remembers the moment when the land changed beneath them. The story of Flores is a story of both creation and destruction, written in ash and stone. The island of Flores was not only shaped by volcanoes and predators, it was also shaped by the sky. The climate of this land changed slowly and sometimes suddenly. It shifted between long wet seasons and long dry periods. Rainfall patterns moved like the tides. Monsoons arrived with force, bringing storms that swept over the forests and filled the rivers. Other years, the rains were weak and the earth cracked beneath the heat. These changes shaped the lives of every creature on the island, including the small humans who called it home. When the rains were strong, the forest grew thick and green, leaves unfurled over the canopy, and streams rushed down the volcanic slopes. Water was everywhere, pools formed beneath the trees, small rivers flowed through the valleys, plants thrived in this season, fruits ripened in bright colors, roots and tubers grew deep and firm in the soil. The small humans learned to move with this abundance. They traveled along the water's edge. They gathered food easily. Animals followed the same paths to drink. In these wet seasons, life was more generous. The monsoons were not simple rains. They were storms that carried the full weight of the ocean's breath. Dark clouds gathered over the island, and thunder rolled like distant stone. Rain fell in sheets, covering the forest floor. The small humans understood this cycle. They knew when the clouds signaled a coming storm. They found shelter beneath rock overhangs or inside their familiar caves. Firelight flickered against the wet stone walls and warmed their bodies. They waited out the storms with patience. In these wetter seasons, the risks were different. The forests became more slippery. The volcanic slopes could crumble beneath the weight of water. Roots that were once firm became soft. The small humans adjusted their movements. They chose paths that stayed above floodwaters. They hunted in different places. The animals they relied upon shifted their patterns too. Prey gathered near places where high ground mixed with abundant food. The small humans learned the new routes and followed the rhythm of the season. When the rains passed and the land dried again, the world changed. The air grew warmer. The rivers shrank to smaller streams. Some of the pools vanished entirely. The forest floor cracked beneath the sun. Plants that were once lush became sparse. Fruits were harder to find. The roots required more effort to dig. The small humans adapted once more. They traveled farther in search of water. They returned to the hidden springs that did not dry out. They climbed higher into the hills where moisture lingered. These dry seasons tested their strength and memory. The predators moved differently when water was scarce. The dragons lurked near the remaining pools, watching for animals that came to drink. The small humans approached these places with caution. They used knowledge passed down through generations. They waited until the heat eased in the late afternoon and the light softened. They watched for the movement of leaves and the sound of animals. The dry season was not a time of rest, but a time of careful planning. There were years when the monsoons were weak or delayed. The rains did not come when expected. The forest held its breath, and the animals grew restless. The small humans faced these unpredictable cycles with resilience. They knew that the island's seasons were not always regular. They learned to store food when it was plentiful. They remembered the places where certain plants grew even in the hardest droughts. The climate taught them to be ready for change. Across the thousands of years they lived on Flores, the climate shifted many times. There were long periods of consistent rain and long periods of dryness. These changes were slow enough that the small humans could adjust. Their bodies and behavior evolved to face this challenge. Their world was not static, it moved between extremes. The small humans adapted because adaptation was their way of life. As the climate shifted, so did the distribution of resources. Water determined where animals moved. Plants followed rainfall patterns. Food became more common in some areas than others. The small humans learned to use these changes to their advantage. They followed the rhythm of the island. They shaped their lives around the flow of resources. The climate did not control their fate, it guided their decisions. Over time, these patterns created a map that existed only in memory. The small humans knew where to go when the rains were heavy. They knew where to rest when the land was dry. They followed the rivers when they flowed strong and followed the seasons when they changed. Their survival did not come from resisting the climate. It came from moving with it. The rhythm of the rain became the rhythm of their lives. The island spoke through storms and droughts. The small humans listened. They lived in a world where the sky and the land were always in conversation. They understood that life on Flores meant living with the changes, not against them, and so they endured. Through countless seasons of heavy rain and long dry months, through monsoons that shook the forests and droughts that dried the rivers, through years of abundance and years of need. The climate shaped the land, and the small humans followed. They adapted to the patterns of water and sun. They learned the language of the island and carried that knowledge across generations. Flores gave, protected, and nurtured the small humans for thousands of years. The forest offered food. The caves offered shelter. The rivers and volcanic soils shaped their movements and guided their daily lives. Yet the same isolation that shielded them also quietly built the conditions for their vulnerability. Islands hold their own rules. They limit what arrives and what leaves. They shape the fate of every species that makes its home there. For the small humans of Flores, isolation became a thread that both sustained and constrained their world. On a continent, life moves across vast distances. Animals migrate, plants spread their seeds on the wind, populations shift and mingle, new genes mix into the old. But on an island like Flores, the movement of life slows. There is no endless land to walk across. There are no wide plains to carry new faces into the community. The ocean is a barrier that holds everything in place. Generations of the small humans lived within this boundary. Their world was contained by the water that surrounded them. Over time, this isolation can lead to a phenomenon that scientists call a genetic bottleneck. It happens when a species is limited to a small population. The number of individuals grows and shrinks, but it does not increase enough to allow for broad genetic diversity. In simple terms, it means that every new generation carries the same small pool of traits. The variety of possibilities becomes limited. The population becomes more fragile. One unexpected disease or change in conditions can have a greater impact. The small humans of Flores may have lived with this quiet limitation for thousands of years. Their population size was never large. The island did not have enough resources to support a vast community. They lived in groups that grew and split into new settlements, but always within the boundaries of the island. The same families shaped the next generations. This closeness created strong bonds, but it also reduced the exchange of new genetic traits. Small islands often show similar patterns. Animals grow smaller or larger. Species evolve unusual shapes and behaviors. Nature experiments more boldly when the world is closed. The dwarf elephants that once roamed Flores are an example of this. They shrank over generations because the island did not have the space or food to support large bodies. The small humans may have experienced a similar path. Isolation nudged their evolution in its own direction. But isolation brings another risk. It makes populations vulnerable to sudden change. A drought, a fire, or a volcanic eruption on a continent can push animals to move elsewhere. On an island, there is nowhere to go. The small humans depended on the stability of the environment they knew. When the climate shifted or a volcano erupted, it could alter the landscape in ways they could not predict. Rivers moved, forests burned, plants vanished, animals changed their patterns. Each change required the small humans to adapt. They were skilled at doing so. They adjusted their movements and followed new sources of food. They changed their hunting strategies. They found new shelters. But adaptation takes time. When changes came too quickly or too often, the small population may have struggled. Unlike species on a mainland, they could not rely on newcomers to bring fresh knowledge or resources. Everything they needed had to come from within their own group. The quiet danger of small populations is that they can decline without a single dramatic moment. A few lost hunters, a season with little water, a disease that spreads through a close community, a slow reduction in birth rates. The small humans lived with the constant balance between growth and decline. Their world was resilient, yet fragile. The forest and caves gave shelter, but the island's limits placed boundaries on survival. There is a beauty in imagining their world. They lived within the rhythm of the land. They knew the paths of the animals and the shapes of the trees. They shared food and fire and memories. Their isolation gave them a unique place in the story of human evolution. It allowed a different kind of intelligence and adaptation to flourish. They were not simply smaller versions of other humans, they were shaped by the island itself. Yet the same isolation that created their unique form may have also become an evolutionary trap. When populations are too small, they cannot easily recover from sudden shifts. The world changes faster than their numbers can grow. The island that protected them became a boundary they could not cross. Their survival depended on the delicate balance of an environment that could alter in a single season. In the silence of their disappearance, there is the echo of this fragile balance. Flores was a place of shelter, but also a place that confined. The small humans survived for thousands of years within its embrace. They faced the risks of isolation with resilience and skill. Their story shows us that evolution does not always move toward increasing size or strength. Sometimes it moves toward uniqueness. Sometimes it creates a life held between safety and vulnerability. Their isolation was not merely a condition of geography. It was a force that shaped their bodies, their minds, and their fate. The island was their world. It held their history, their shelter, and their challenges. The sea around Flores carried the promise of safety and the weight of confinement. In this quiet isolation, the small humans lived, adapted, and endured. Some mysteries in science begin with a single bone, Others begin with a question like a quiet voice that will not leave. For the small humans of Flores, the question is simple yet profound. Where did they come from? Their tiny skeletons and ancient tools tell us how they lived and how they adapted to the island's world. But their origins are still a puzzle made of scattered clues across Southeast Asia and fragments of history etched into stone. To understand their beginnings, scientists have looked far beyond Flores. They have studied other fossils found across neighboring islands and on the mainland. They found bones of another ancient human, a species that walked upright and used tools long before modern humans appeared. This species is known as Homo erectus. Fossils of Homo erectus have been found in places like Java, not far from Flores. These fossils show a tall and robust human with a strong jaw and a larger brain. They lived nearly 2 million years ago. Their tools were simple but effective. They crossed rivers and moved across continents. Some scientists believe that the small humans of Flores may be descendants of Homo erectus. If so, then a journey must have taken place long ago. It would have been a journey across seas or natural land bridges that once connected the islands. The sea levels were lower during colder periods. These lower sea levels may have revealed paths that no longer exist. Rivers that later became oceans once formed long stretches of land. It is possible that Homo erectus reached Flores by walking across these temporary landscapes, but Flores is a special case. Even during low sea levels, it remained separated by deep water. No known land bridge connected it directly to nearby islands. This raises another question. How did the ancestors of the small humans reach Flores at all? Some scientists suggest they may have built simple rafts or boats. These vessels may have been used to travel across narrow stretches of sea. We may never know exactly how they crossed, but the evidence hints that early humans were capable of traveling farther than we once believed. The puzzles grow deeper when scientists compare the bones of Homo erectus with the bones of the Flores humans. Some features are similar. The shape of the skull and the structure of the jaw resemble those found in Homo erectus fossils. But the bodies of the small humans are much smaller. Their brains are smaller too. Their proportions do not match any other known human species exactly. They are not simply shrunken versions of Homo erectus. They are something different. Another idea has been suggested. It is called island dwarfism. On small islands with limited resources, large animals often become smaller over many generations. This happened with the dwarf elephants on Flores, for may have happened with the small humans as well. If Homo erectus reached Flores, their descendants may have adapted to the island by becoming smaller. A smaller body needs less food and can survive in environments where resources are limited. Over thousands of years, this could create a new form of human shaped by the island alone. But not all scientists agree with this idea. Some propose that the small humans descended from an even earlier ancestor, perhaps an ancient human species, smaller than Homo erectus, made the journey first. If true, this would mean that the history of human migration in Southeast Asia is older and more complex than we thought. Fossils from islands like Sulawesi and Luzon offer hints of other small human species. They suggest that ancient human migrations may have happened again and again, carving many paths across the oceans. Different models compete for answers. One model suggests that the small humans evolved from Homo erectus after arriving on Flores. Another model suggests they are a separate branch from an older ancestor. A third model suggests that multiple migrations brought different human species to Southeast Asia. These species may have interacted or remained separate. The paths of human history become like braided rivers, weaving together and pulling apart across time. To solve this puzzle, scientists have studied tools found on Flores and nearby islands. The tools help tell the story of their origins. They reveal similarities in the way stone was shaped. They show patterns that match tools made by Homo erectus in Java. They suggest shared knowledge or shared ancestors. The tools are not simple copies. They reveal ideas passed through generations. They tell us that the small humans carried some of the same traditions as their possible ancestors. The puzzle of their origins is not yet complete. Fossils can only tell part of the story. The sea has hidden many clues beneath its surface. The forest has covered others with roots and soil. But each new discovery offers a glimpse into the ancient world: the bones found in caves, the tools buried in volcanic ash, the fossils discovered on neighboring islands. All of these pieces point to a long journey across time and water. The origins of the small humans remind us that history is not always a straight path. It is a story with many beginnings and many possibilities. The small humans of Flores were shaped by an ancient journey. Their story began long before the island became their home. Their bones carry the memory of ancestors who crossed seas and walked through forests under ancient skies. Their origins remain a puzzle, but every piece brings us closer to understanding how they came to be. When scientists first studied the strange gap in the archaeological layers of Flores, one possibility rose from the earth like a whispered warning. A volcano had erupted. Not a small eruption, but one powerful enough to coat the forest in ash and change the rhythm of life on the island. The memory of this event is written in the sediments of Leang Bua and scattered across the landscape. Thick layers of pale ash settle in the soil like pages in a story. These layers are not accidental. They are signatures of a moment when the world changed. Volcanoes reshape more than land. They reshape the sky. When a volcano erupts with enough force, it sends ash into the air. This ash does not simply fall, it rises high into the atmosphere and spreads across the island. The sky turns gray. Sunlight struggles to pass through the thick clouds. Rain carries ash to the ground. Streams of water become murky. Leaves and branches bend under the weight. The air becomes heavy with the scent of smoke and heat. This is the first sign of the volcano's power. The ash cloud that blanketed Flores would have created a sudden and dangerous shift in the environment. Plants that depended on sunlight became weak or died. The forest floor, once rich and alive, turned into a soft blanket of gray. Lakes and rivers filled with ash. The balance of the island's food chain began to crumble. Small animals struggled to find enough food. The larger predators lost their prey. The small humans of Flores suddenly faced a world that no longer offered its usual abundance. The food chain on Flores was already fragile. It depended on seasonal rains, limited plant life, and the careful balance between predators and prey. When the volcano erupted, that balance was tested. Trees and plants that once fed the dwarf elephants withered beneath the ash. The stegodons could no longer rely on their familiar pathways. With fewer plants, there were fewer animals to hunt. The small humans found their hunting grounds transformed. Their routines had to change. They had to search farther from home. They had to move with caution. In the aftermath of the eruption, many species on Flores may have struggled. The dragons that once roamed freely now faced a scarcity of prey. Their movements shifted. Their behavior became unpredictable. The giant storks also faced hunger. The entire food web became strained. The small humans who depended on the forest for food and shelter faced the same challenges. They had to adapt quickly or face the consequences. Yet as powerful as the volcano was, it did not tell the entire story. The evidence shows that the small humans continued to survive after the eruption. The ash layers in the caves are not followed immediately by silence. Instead, there are signs that the small humans returned. They rebuilt their fires. They crafted tools. They hunted again. They were capable of adapting to the aftermath of the volcano. They found ways to live even when the land was reshaped. This survival makes the volcano hypothesis more complex. While the eruption may have weakened the ecosystem, it does not fully explain the final disappearance. A single eruption can cause death and destruction, but it does not usually erase an entire species completely. There is no sudden burial of bodies. There are no clear signs of mass death. There are no layers of remains that suggest an entire population perished at once. Instead, there is a slow fading from the archaeological record. The missing trace of their final chapter remains the central mystery. The volcano may have set the stage. It may have weakened the species and changed the landscape. It may have forced the small humans into new patterns, but it did not erase them entirely. The disappearance happened quietly and without visible struggle. This gentle ending does not match the violence of a volcanic eruption. It suggests that the island's changes continued long after the ash settled. Some scientists believe that the eruption created a chain reaction. The weakened food web may have made the small humans more vulnerable to other pressures. Perhaps they struggled to find enough food. Perhaps disease moved through the population. Perhaps the arrival of modern humans played a role. The volcano may have been only one part of a larger story, a silent beginning to a series of events. The ash preserved in the caves remains a record of this moment. It is a layer of memory that marks the island's transformation. But the silence that follows still leaves room for questions. The volcano hypothesis explains the disruption. It describes a world thrown off balance. It shows how one event can reshape an entire island. But it does not answer the final question. It does not explain why the small humans vanished without a trace. The eruption was fierce and sudden. It changed the land. It strained the food chain. It altered the lives of every species. Yet the perfect disappearance of the small humans remains separate from the ash and the fire. It remains quiet and unresolved. The volcano may have been a silent killer, but it was not the only force at work. The mystery of their final chapter still rests deep within the layers of the island, waiting for the next piece of the story to be found. There is another possibility for the disappearance of the small humans of Flores. It is quieter than a volcanic eruption. It does not involve fire or sudden disaster. Instead, it is woven from the slow movement of another species across distant lands and seas. Around the same time that the small humans lived their last days on Flores, modern humans were spreading across Southeast Asia. These early travelers carried with them tools, fire, and knowledge that had grown over thousands of years. They walked across islands and rivers just as the small humans once had. The timing of this dispersal is written into the archaeological record. Evidence from caves and ancient shelters in nearby regions shows that modern humans began moving through this part of the world around 50,000 years ago. They spread from the mainland into the island chains. They crossed narrow seas using boats and rafts. Their journey was not fast, but it was steady. They followed coastlines, rivers, and forests. They settled in new places, built fires, and hunted the animals that lived there. As modern humans reached these islands, they brought a different way of living. Their tools were refined. Their bodies and minds were shaped by traditions passed through many generations. They worked in larger groups and created more advanced weapons. They shared information in ways that allowed knowledge to grow. Their arrival on Flores may not have been dramatic. There may have been no great moment of discovery or confrontation. Instead, it may have been a gradual meeting of two worlds. One of the quiet consequences of this meeting was the sharing of resources. Flores was already a fragile island. The forest, rivers, and hills could only support so many mouths. When modern humans arrived, they would have needed the same things that the small humans needed: food, water, safe shelter. The overlap was unavoidable. Both species hunted animals that lived on the island. Both needed wood for fire and stone for tools. The competition for these resources began not with conflict, but with simple necessity. When two species share a landscape, subtle changes can shift the balance. Modern humans were skilled hunters. They may have used new tactics or new weapons. Their presence could have altered the behavior of the animals. The dwarf elephants may have become more cautious. Other prey may have moved away from the areas where people traveled. The small humans depended on the patterns of the land. When these patterns changed, their way of life changed as well. There is no evidence of direct violence between the two species, no signs of battle, no weapons left beside the bones of the small humans, no shelters burned in conflict. Instead, the archaeological silence speaks of something more delicate. Competition does not always arrive with fury. It can arrive with footsteps that simply claim the same land. One species grows in number while the other slowly shrinks. The arrival of modern humans may have placed pressure on the small humans in many ways. They may have taken the best shelters or the most fertile hunting grounds. They may have introduced disease, even without understanding. They may have taken food that the small humans relied upon during certain seasons. These small changes add up over time. A few lost hunts can mean hunger. A few lost seasons can weaken a population already small and isolated. Over many years, the population of the small humans may have dwindled. They had no means of expanding beyond the island. The ocean formed a boundary that kept them contained. The modern humans, in contrast, were part of a wider movement. Their numbers grew, their tools improved, their knowledge spread across islands and continents. The balance between the two species shifted in favor of the newcomers. Scientists have looked for more evidence to understand this hypothesis. They have studied stone tools found in different layers of sediment. Some tools match the style of modern humans, others match the style of the small humans. The transition between these tools suggests a gradual change. The presence of modern humans does not immediately erase the traces of the small humans. Instead, it creates a slow overlap. The signs of one culture begin to replace the signs of the other. This overlap is one of the most compelling parts of the story. It tells us that the disappearance of the small humans may not have been caused by a single moment. It may have been the result of a slow shift in the balance of the island. Modern humans may have simply taken the space that the small humans once held. The quiet competition for food and shelter may have been enough to push the ancient population toward decline. There is a beauty in understanding this form of conflict. It is not written in violence, it is written in the gentle changes of daily life. Two species shared the same land. One grew stronger and more numerous, the other remained small and limited. The island could not hold them both. The story ends not with fire and destruction, but with the quiet fading of one species as another continued to walk forward. The human arrival hypothesis does not explain everything. It does not tell us exactly how or when the small humans took their last steps on Flores, but it offers a possibility rooted in the slow and steady forces of change. The meeting of two species created a delicate shift that echoed through generations. The small humans did not disappear in battle. They disappeared in silence as their world was slowly taken by those who came after them. There is a third possibility that rises from the natural history of the island itself. It does not involve new visitors from distant continents or a single natural catastrophe. Instead, it looks inward toward the ancient food web that shaped every life on Flores. This hypothesis begins not with humans, but with the predators that ruled the forests and riverbanks long before any footprints touched the island's shores. The Komodo dragons had evolved to become the top predators of Flores. They were powerful, cold-bodied hunters with sharp teeth and ambush instincts. Their strength came not only from their size, but from the way they waited and watched. These reptiles do not chase, they stalk. They remain still beneath the shadows of trees, moving only when the opportunity is perfect. The island belonged to them long before the small humans appeared. Their presence was a constant force shaping behavior, movement, and survival. After the volcanic eruptions and climate shifts, the island's balance changed. The eruption had covered the land in ash and altered the growth of plants. The food sources that sustained the dwarf elephants and other prey had become less reliable. In this challenging environment, the dragons had to adapt. Their numbers may have risen when carcasses became more common. They fed on the animals that did not survive the sudden environmental change. Their populations grew into new territories and stretched across areas they had rarely entered before. With more dragons on the prowl, the forest paths and riverbanks became more dangerous. The small humans were already skilled at avoiding predators, but the increase in dragon numbers created new risks. These animals hunted by waiting close to waterholes or along trails where prey was forced to walk. They could survive on fewer meals. They could wait for days. Even a single moment of distraction could become a fatal mistake. The dwarf elephants were already struggling to find food and water. As their numbers declined, the dragons became more opportunistic. They scouted for smaller prey. They turned to any animal they could catch. Their hunger drove them to explore deeper into the habitats where the small humans lived. The caves and shelters that had once offered protection were now watched by larger predators. The night became quieter and more unpredictable. In this environment, the small humans faced a kind of pressure that does not leave clear marks in the archaeological record. Predators do not always leave bones behind. They scatter the remains and carry pieces far from where the kill took place. A dragon might take only a single member of a family group, but over many generations, a few losses can change the future of a species. Predation does not need to be constant, it only needs to be unpredictable. Scientists have looked at the fossil remains of the giant storks, Komodo dragons, and dwarf elephants found on Flores. The distribution of these fossils changes after volcanic events. There is evidence that the prey species declined in number. The storks and dragons could have turned to new food sources, including the small humans. There are no direct signs of dragon attacks on their bones. The clues are more subtle. They lie in the shifting patterns of species presence and absence across layers of sediment. The predator pressure hypothesis suggests a slow, quiet decline. The small humans were already limited in number. Their populations were isolated and vulnerable to sudden changes. When predators become more numerous and food becomes scarce, the risks multiply. Every hunt, every walk to water, every journey between shelters becomes a moment of danger. Children must be protected. Adults must be cautious. A single dragon can change the habits of an entire group. Flores offered limited places for safety. Fire was one of the only tools that kept the dragons away. But fire requires wood and time. In seasons of scarcity, it becomes harder to maintain. The dragons may have learned to wait at the edges of camp. They may have followed the smell of cooking or prey remains. Their presence could have slowly shaped where the small humans slept, harvested food, and traveled. Opportunistic predation rarely leaves scars in the soil. It does not create mass graves or sudden disappearances. It creates pressure that builds across years and generations. The small humans may have lost one or two individuals at a time. These losses weaken a community that is already small. The next drought or the next volcanic tremor tightens the strain. There is less room for error, less space for recovery. This hypothesis shows that the disappearance of the small humans may have been caused not by a single event, but by the steady weight of predators that had ruled the island long before. The dragons did not need to hunt them into extinction. They only needed to reduce their numbers and force them into harder choices. The small humans once coexisted with these predators. They found ways to avoid them. But when the land changed and prey became scarce, the balance shifted. The island that once supported many species became a testing ground for survival. The dragons, storks, and small humans were all part of the same story. Each change in population and environment affected the others. Over time, the quiet pressure of predation could have been enough to tip the scales. There is no single answer in this hypothesis, only the image of an island where predators watched from the shadows and survival depended on caution and chance. The small humans lived within this world for thousands of years, until the balance shifted just enough for their presence to fade. Some disappearances are not caused by predators, or hunger, or sudden arrivals from distant shores. Some vanishings begin quietly inside the land itself. Flores is an island shaped by restless forces. Its mountains rise from volcanic rock. Its caves were carved by ancient water. Its valleys are steep and fragile. For hundreds of thousands of years, the earth beneath the small humans was never still. It shifted and settled. It broke apart and reformed. The island collapse hypothesis looks to these movements for answers. It suggests that the ground itself may have played a role in their disappearance. To walk through Flores today is to see the signs of instability. Large portions of the island are steep and prone to erosion. Heavy rains fall during the monsoon season. The soil becomes saturated. The valleys fill with water. Rivers swell and spill over their banks. Then the water rushes down the slopes. Trees are torn from the ground. Rocks tumble into the streams. Landslides reshape the hillsides in a single night. These natural forces are not gentle. They are silent until they break free. For the small humans who lived here, the landscape offered both shelter and danger. The caves they used as homes and hiding places were carved from limestone. Limestone is a strong rock, but fragile when exposed to water. Over time, dripping water can carve deep channels. It can widen cracks. A cave that feels safe for generations can shift without warning. The ceiling can fall. The entrance can collapse. The ground can give way beneath your feet. Scientists studying the sediments in Leang Bua and other caves on Flores have found evidence of sudden changes. There are layers of soil that show rapid deposition. These layers are made of material carried by floods or landslides. They tell a story of events that happened quickly. A river may have changed course. A hill may have slid into a valley. A cave entrance may have closed. These shifts can bury entire landscapes in a matter of hours. If a cave collapsed, it would not leave the clean fossils scientists depend on. The bones would not rest together. They would be scattered or crushed. Water could carry them far from their original resting place. Flash floods could wash away remains. The island collapse hypothesis suggests that one or several of these events may have erased the traces of the small humans. Their shelters may have been destroyed. Their communities may have been buried. Flash floods are especially powerful on Flores. When rain falls on steep volcanic slopes, the water flows fast. It forms sudden streams. It carves new channels. It gathers speed and force. Anything in its path is swept away. Small humans crossing a valley or living near a river may have been caught in these floods. Entire groups could disappear with the passing of one storm. The land washes away without leaving behind clear evidence. Scientists have also considered the possibility of sinkholes. These can form in limestone landscapes where water dissolves the rock. A section of ground that looks safe can suddenly drop. A camp or living site might vanish underground in a moment. These events do not leave a clean archaeological record. They hide the traces of life beneath layers of rock and soil. Even if the bodies remain, they may lie in places that have never been excavated. The island collapse hypothesis does not depend on a single event. It considers many small or large shifts, landslides after heavy rains, cave ins during earthquakes, flash floods during storms. Each of these events can remove individuals or entire groups. Over time, the population becomes smaller, the community becomes more fragile. A group already under stress from predators, volcanoes, or competition might not survive the added pressure of a changing landscape. This hypothesis also explains why there are so few remains of the small humans. If their living sites were lost to cave collapses or floods, the bones would not stay in one place. They would not form easy layers for scientists to excavate. They would be buried deep or washed into ravines. They might lie beneath rock that is too thick to remove. The traces of their presence may be hidden far from the caves archaeologists have searched. There are places on Flores that have never been explored, caves tucked into high cliffs, valleys overgrown with forest, regions where the soil is too unstable to dig. The island is full of secrets. Some may hold the history of the small humans. Others may have buried their final moments so deeply that they will never be found. The land shifts and changes. The earth keeps its stories in layers that scientists may never reach. The island collapse hypothesis reminds us that disappearance does not always leave a mark. It does not always come with violence or disease. It can happen quietly through the slow erosion of home and shelter. The ground beneath their feet may have been both support and threat. Over time, the weight of natural forces could have been enough to remove a people from the landscape. The story of their final days might be written not in bones, but in the silent movements of the land itself. There is one more idea that reaches deeper into the quiet mathematics of survival. It does not look to predators or storms or the arrival of a competing species. Instead, it looks inward at the fragile balance that every small population must hold against time. Scientists call this the isolation death spiral. It is a pattern seen in many species that live on small or remote islands. When the number of individuals falls too low, the population can begin to collapse under its own weight. The small humans of Flores lived in groups that were already tiny compared to other ancient humans. Their world was limited by steep mountains, dense forests, and surrounding sea. These boundaries shaped their lives for thousands of years. Every birth and every death mattered. When a species has only a few members, the loss of one individual is not just a moment of sadness, it is a shift in the balance of the entire population. When numbers begin to fall, the effects can grow quickly. Fewer individuals means fewer hunters to gather food or protect the young. Fewer adults means less knowledge to pass down. The skills that allow a group to thrive can disappear when even one elder is gone. The small humans likely had traditions of tool making, fire use, and hunting strategy. These traditions were vital to their survival. They were not written in words or carved into stone. They were held in memory and shared through teaching. Imagine a group that has lived on Flores for generations. They know how to find the water sources that appear only in certain seasons. They know the safest paths through the volcanic slopes. They know the signs of a dragon lying in wait. These skills are not simple. They are learned over a lifetime. If one elder with knowledge of these patterns dies, the group loses more than one person. They lose a part of their history. As populations shrink, something else happens. The gene pool becomes smaller. Genetic diversity is reduced. This can lead to health problems that spread more easily. Diseases can become more dangerous. Births may become more difficult. The young may be more vulnerable. The future of the group becomes uncertain. This type of decline does not happen in a single generation. It can take hundreds of years. The effects are small at first, almost invisible, but slowly they build. The loss of skilled hunters or elders creates gaps in the community. These gaps affect every part of daily life. If there are fewer hunters, the group has less food. If there are fewer caregivers, the children grow up with less protection. If there are fewer teachers, the traditions of tool-making can begin to fade. The small humans used careful techniques to shape stone into sharp blades. These tools required planning and patience. They were not made by accident. They represent knowledge passed through many generations. When a population is large, traditions are carried by many voices. When it is small, traditions become fragile. A single shift in the environment, a sickness, or a predator attack can silence a teacher forever. Without skilled hands guiding younger generations, tools can become simpler, techniques can become lost. A group that once made advanced hunting tools could find itself using more basic designs. The decline of technology is not a sudden event, it is a slow unraveling of knowledge. The isolation death spiral also changes behavior. When a group becomes smaller, it may avoid long journeys or dangerous hunts. It may stay close to familiar ground. It may take fewer risks. These choices keep individuals safe, but they also limit the chances of finding new resources. The group becomes more dependent on a shrinking territory. The island that once offered opportunity now begins to confine them. The small humans were already living at the edge of what was possible. Their bodies and minds had adapted to the island over many generations. The balance of their world was delicate. The disappearance of only a few individuals could set the spiral in motion. Each loss made the next loss more likely. The group becomes too small to recover. The spiral tightens. Scientists see this pattern in many isolated species. Birds on remote islands, mammals that live in small herds, plants that grow only in narrow valleys. When populations fall below a certain number, the chance of recovery becomes slim. The weight of isolation grows heavier with time. For the small humans of Flores, the isolation death spiral may have been the final force in their disappearance. The island kept them safe for thousands of years. It protected them from the outside world, but it also kept them contained. When change came, whether from volcanoes, predators, or competition, the population may already have been too small. The loss of a few elders or skilled hunters may have been enough to start the decline. The traditions that sustained them may have faded. The spiral does not end with a single moment. It ends when the last group is too small to continue, when the final voices fall silent, when the tools are no longer made. The isolation that once shaped their identity may have become the force that brought their story to a close. Not every trace of a vanished species lies in bones or stone. Some linger instead in stories, held inside the memories of the people who came after. Across the islands of Indonesia, there are legends of small beings who once lived in the forests and caves. These legends were passed down long before scientists arrived with tools and theories. They whisper of another kind of human who shared the land with the ancestors of those who still live there today. The stories vary from island to island, but a common theme runs through them. They speak of tiny people who moved softly through the night and built shelters in the hills. Some stories describe them as shy and peaceful. Others speak of a people who kept to themselves and avoided strangers. There are tales of small footprints in the mud and laughter heard deep in the forest. There are stories of gifts left at the edge of a village and mysterious figures that appeared only briefly before disappearing again. On the island of Flores, these stories take on a special meaning. The locals have long known of beings called the Abu-Gogo. The name itself carries an ancient echo. The Abu-Gogo are described as small. Their bodies were said to be covered with hair. They spoke in low voices and copied the sounds of human speech. The stories do not describe them as spirits or mythical creatures. They describe them as people who lived in the forests long ago. Some versions of the legend say that the Abu-Gogo were clever and resourceful. They knew how to find food and water, They gathered fruits and plants. They hunted small animals. Other versions say they could be mischievous. They would take food from the gardens of villagers when times were hard. The stories do not always agree, but they share one idea. There was once another small community living in the shadows of the island, a community that vanished, leaving only memory behind. When scientists first uncovered the bones of the small humans in Leang Bua, they were struck by the similarity to this folklore. The stories of the Abu Gogo had been told for generations. They predated the discovery by centuries, yet they described beings that resembled the small humans in size and behavior. Some wondered if the legend could be a distant echo of real encounters. Perhaps the stories carried fragments of history that survived long after the species was gone. But scientists approach these ideas with care. Folklore is shaped by imagination and belief. It can change as it is retold. It does not follow the rules of evidence that archaeology requires. The legends cannot be used to prove that the small humans lived until recent times. They cannot confirm exactly how the species looked or behaved. Science must be cautious. It must separate story from fact. Yet even with caution, scientists do not dismiss these stories. They see them as part of a larger picture. There is a reason folklore endures. Stories carry cultural memory. They hold the experiences of people who lived through times we cannot see. When a species disappears from the landscape, its presence may still linger in the collective memory of those who shared the land. Stories can preserve memories in a different way than fossils do. They can keep the shape of an idea alive, even when the physical traces are gone. It is possible that the legend of the Ibu Gogo reflects a time when humans and tiny humans overlapped on Flores. Perhaps early encounters inspired stories of small people living in the forests. These encounters may have faded over centuries until only the story remained. The bones hidden deep in the caves and the stories told by the locals may be two parts of the same story, one carved into the earth, the other carried in the voices of ancestors. There are similar legends across other islands in Indonesia, stories of small beings living in the mountains, tales of mysterious neighbors who lived apart from humans but shared the same landscape. Each story reflects a memory of coexistence, something seen or imagined long ago. These legends remind us that the history of Flores is not only written in fossils, it is written in the hearts and traditions of the people who have lived there for centuries. Stories can outlast species because they do not depend on bones or tools. They depend on the imagination and memory of those who tell them. When a community gathers at night to speak of the past, they preserve the legacy of those who came before. Even if the small humans disappeared thousands of years ago, their presence may live on in the stories of the islands. The echoes of the Ibu Gogo continue to be told. Scientists listen, not as proof, but as another path to understanding. The legends speak to a deeper truth. The past does not always vanish completely. Sometimes it remains just beneath the surface. A whisper among the trees, a story passed from one generation to the next. In these stories, the small humans of Flores may still be walking through the forests, alive in memory long after their footsteps have faded from the soil. When we move through the story of the small humans of Flores, we pass through landscapes shaped by fire and stone. We walk alongside creatures that hunted and survived by instinct and chance. We listen for the footsteps of people who lived in a world unlike any we know. Yet it is not just their existence that stays with us, it is their disappearance, a disappearance without a clear ending. No last shelter, no final campsite, no trace of a moment when their story stopped. For many scientists, this is the center of the mystery. Ancient species leave traces of their final days. They leave graves or remains in caves. They leave tools buried beneath layers of sediment. They leave signs of disease or conflict. The small humans of Flores leave almost nothing. Their bones appear in earlier layers of soil. Their tools appear in older sediments. Then the layers above fall silent. It is as if the island simply turned a page and they were gone. This silence is not easy to explain. The absence of final evidence is itself a puzzle. It asks questions that the fossils do not answer. Did they vanish suddenly or slowly? Did they move to another part of the island or change their way of life? Were they pushed out by other forces or did they fade away over time? The archaeological record does not offer a clear conclusion. It leaves room for imagination and theories. It leaves space for wonder. Their vanishing is also difficult because of what they were. They were a human species, not an ancestor, but a branch of the human family that lived at the same time as our own. Their bodies and minds adapted to an island world. They developed skills and traditions that allowed them to survive for tens of thousands of years. They were small, but they were capable. They used tools. They made fire. They lived in communities. Their survival challenges simple ideas of intelligence. For many years, scientists believed that complex tools and fire were signs of a large brain, but the small humans of Flores had much smaller brains than modern humans. Their brains were closer in size to those of early hominins or even some animals, yet their actions were complex. They planned hunts, they created tools from stone, they lived in caves and shared tasks. They show us that intelligence is not only a matter of size, it is also a matter of adaptation and creativity. This realization unsettles the history of human evolution. It suggests that there are many ways to be human. There is not just one path. There is not just one form of intelligence. The small humans found their own way. They found solutions to the challenges of their world. Their disappearance raises questions about the nature of intelligence itself. What does it mean to thrive? What does it mean to adapt? What does it mean to be human? Their vanishing also reminds us of the fragility of our species. We often think of humans as the dominant species on the planet. We spread across continents. We survive in harsh environments. We build shelters and cities. Yet the small humans of Flores remind us that the human family is larger and more complicated than we knew. They remind us that human species can vanish. They remind us that the past is full of stories that ended before ours began. Scientists who study these ancient remains are not only looking for bones or tools, they are looking for the story of a species that lived and disappeared without leaving clear final traces. They are looking for clues hidden in layers of ash, stone, and dirt. They are asking how a species can survive for thousands of years and then leave no last chapter. They are asking what it means to be one of many branches on the tree of human evolution. This mystery continues to inspire new research. New caves are explored. New layers of sediment are examined. Scientists use tools that can read ancient DNA from soil and rock. They use technology to search for hidden chambers and narrow passages. They look for any sign that might help answer the question of their disappearance. But each new discovery adds to the wonder rather than closing the story. Even if one hypothesis offers a possible explanation, there is no certainty. The silence at the end of their story remains. It is this silence that haunts the scientists who study them. It is not just the lack of remains, it is the sense that a whole world disappeared without leaving a final mark. A world of caves and fire, a world of shared hunts, a world of tiny humans moving through forests and mountains. The small humans of Flores were part of our family. Their disappearance reminds us that survival is not guaranteed. It reminds us that species rise and fall. It reminds us that even those who adapt and thrive can be lost to time. Their story does not end in certainty. It ends in silence. A silence that carries the weight of everything they were and everything they might have become. Flores has offered us many answers. It has also kept countless secrets. Even today, when satellites sweep across the sky and maps seem to capture every curve of the Earth, huge portions of this island remain untouched by scientific hands. The thick forests and steep mountains create natural borders that few have crossed. The valleys hide in deep shadows. Rivers cut sharp lines into the volcanic stone, and beneath the ground, caves lie waiting in silence. From above, Flores appears like a network of ridges and basins shaped by ancient eruptions and rains. Each ridge holds its own history, each basin its own ecosystem. The island is not a single landscape, it is a collection of small worlds, each one different from the next. Scientists believe that many of these small worlds have never been explored. They believe that hidden within these places are clues that may change our understanding of the small humans who once lived here. Some caves are known only through stories told by the people who live nearby. Other caves lie high in the cliffs, reachable only by narrow paths. There are caves near the coast where the waves echo against the stone. There are caves in the mountains where the air is cool and still. These caves could hold bones or tools or ash layers that have not been touched for tens of thousands of years. They could hold the final chapters of the small human story. The search for new caves is not simple. The landscape shifts and grows over time. Forests spread, and rivers carve deeper into the earth. Landslides bury paths. There are places scientists cannot reach without great difficulty. Yet the land continues to hint at what remains hidden. In satellite images and geological surveys, patterns emerge, areas where ancient rivers once flowed, valleys where caves likely formed beneath the limestone. Each time scientists step into a new region, they find something unexpected. These discoveries do not always involve bones. Sometimes they involve tools worn smooth by time. Sometimes they involve pieces of charcoal from ancient fires. Sometimes they involve fragments of stone that were shaped by hands. Even these small clues can lead to larger questions. They can show that the small humans lived in more places than we knew. They can show that their world was wider and more complex than we imagined. There is another way the land can speak. It is through sediment. When scientists collect soil from caves or riverbeds, they can study the tiny pieces of history trapped within. This sediment can hold traces of DNA from plants, animals, and even humans. These traces are so small they cannot be seen with the naked eye. They can be read only through careful analysis. Sediment DNA can reveal which species lived in a region, even if their bones are gone. It can show the presence of humans in a cave that holds no visible remains. This technique is changing the way we search for ancient life. It allows scientists to look beneath the surface, to find clues where none were expected, to see history written in particles of soil. Sediment DNA has already revealed surprising insights on other islands in Southeast Asia. It has shown that ancient humans shared these landscapes with other species long before modern humans arrived. It has shown that island evolution is full of unexpected turns. As this technique is applied to Flores, it may reveal the hidden presence of the small humans in places we have not yet explored. It may show that they lived in caves we never reached. It may show that their story did not end in the places we know today. It may show that they ranged farther and survived longer than we imagined. Even if we never find new bones, the soil may speak. There are regions of Flores where the forests are thick and wild. These areas hold dangers and challenges, but they also hold beauty and silence. In these unexplored valleys, the story of the island is alive. The leaves rustle with the movement of animals. The rivers carve their paths through the stone. The caves lie hidden beneath layers of time. Scientists continue to search. They trek through the mountains. They crawl into narrow caves. They study the soil and the stone. Each new find brings us closer to understanding what happened to the small humans. Each discovery reminds us that the past is not finished. It waits patiently beneath the earth. There is a possibility that one day a new cave will be opened, that bones will be found resting in the sediment, that tools will lie beside ancient fire pits, that the final chapter will be revealed. The story of the small humans may still be buried in the quiet places of Flores, waiting for the moment when the land decides to give up its secrets. When the bones of the small humans were first lifted from the soil of Leang Bua, it was not only the cave that changed, it was the story of who we are. For centuries, our understanding of human evolution followed a familiar pattern, a single line climbing steadily upward, a series of ancestors, one replacing the next. The small humans of Flores ask us to see things differently. They show us that the story of humanity does not flow like a straight river. It branches and bends. It circles upon itself. It leaves behind islands of history that survive long after the main path moves on. These small humans challenge the idea that only one kind of human survived into the recent past. They lived at a time when modern humans were already crossing the world. They lived when Neanderthals wandered through Europe and Denisovans moved across Asia. They lived in a moment when many different human forms shared the earth. Their survival tells us that there was no single human story. There were many stories, each shaped by the land, the climate, and the challenges of daily life. Their existence forces us to rethink evolution. It was once believed that larger brains and taller bodies were the inevitable result of progress, that the story of humanity was always moving toward a single ideal. The small humans of Flores show that evolution is not destiny, it is adaptation. It is shaped by the environment. On a small island with limited resources, a small body and a small brain could be an advantage. Less food is needed, shorter distances are easier to travel. The island itself chose the form these humans would take. Their size does not diminish their achievement, it shows the diversity of life. It shows that intelligence and survival do not look the same in every species. They created tools and fire. They hunted prey and avoided predators. They survived volcanic eruptions and shifting climates. They built a world that fit their bodies and minds. This diversity opens a new window into human evolution. It shows that adaptation is more powerful than simple size or strength. Scientists now understand that human evolution was not a single line of ancestors leading to us. It was more like a forest of species. Some branches reached further than others. Some grew in unexpected directions. Some grew in isolation on islands where the rules of evolution were rewritten. The small humans remind us that these branches existed side by side. They remind us that humanity did not exist alone for most of its history. Our world was shared with others who looked different, thought differently, and lived in their own ways. This idea changes how we think about ourselves. It shows that our species was one among many. It shows that survival was not guaranteed. It shows that intelligence and creativity come in different forms. It shows that our place in the world is connected to everything around us. The small humans were not ancestors, but relatives. Their disappearance tells us that being human does not mean being permanent. Their story also changes how we understand adaptation. We often imagine evolution pushing species toward greater size or complexity, but the small humans show that sometimes the best path is the quiet one. They adapted to a small island by becoming smaller. They used the land as it was. They found solutions that fit their world. Their evolution was shaped by constraint, not expansion. This is a reminder that there is no single human form, no single way of thinking or surviving. The diversity of ancient humans shows that life on Earth finds different answers to the same challenges. It finds different shapes, different minds, different stories. The small humans of Flores are only one example. There were others: humans in the mountains, humans in distant forests, humans in icy plains. The world once held many human species. Each one carved a life from the land. When we add the small humans to the story of our past, everything becomes larger and more complex. The timeline stretches, the number of species grows, the possibilities expand. We begin to see human evolution not as a ladder, but as a tapestry, threads woven through time. Some threads end early, others continue, some cross, others run parallel. This wider view of humanity helps us understand our own existence. It shows that survival depends on chance, adaptation, and connection. It shows that even the smallest population can leave a legacy that changes our understanding. The small humans did not write their history in language or cities. They wrote it in bones and tools. They wrote it in the land itself. They wrote it in the story of evolution. The tiny humans of Flores remind us that our species is only one possibility. We are one branch on a tree that once held many branches. Their story expands our own. It invites us to imagine a world filled with different forms of humanity, a world where many species walked under the same sky, a world that shaped us all in its quiet and powerful way. There was a time when our world was not shaped by a single kind of human. There was a time when the earth held many different answers to the question of what it means to be human. On islands, in forests, and across wide continents, different forms of intelligence shared the same planet. Some walked with broad shoulders and powerful limbs. Some carried small bodies and small brains that still planned, hunted, and endured. Some lived in great numbers. Others survived in tiny families, tucked into caves or valleys. Together, they formed a world that was far more varied than the one we know today. The small humans of Flores are only one part of this wider story. Their bones whisper of a world that stretched across time in quiet ways, a world where evolution shaped life into many forms, each responding to its own challenges and its own landscape. They show us that the story of humanity is not the tale of a single winner. It is the story of a collection of species that shared the earth, sometimes for hundreds of thousands of years. They lived side by side, separated by distance and time, yet united by the same problem of survival. If we look back far enough, we find that our species was never alone. There were Neanderthals who shaped stone with careful hands. There were Denisovans who crossed high mountains and cold plains. There were the small humans of Flores who moved through forests and caves, following ancient paths worn by the need for food, water, and safety. There were others too, species whose bones have not yet been found, species whose stories lie buried under rock and soil. When we imagine this world, it becomes a very different place, not a lonely planet that waited for our arrival, but a living world filled with many kinds of minds. Some were strong, some were small. All were shaped by the same forces of climate, chance, and need. Their lives show us that intelligence does not have a single form. It grows in different directions. It solves problems in different ways. Their disappearance reminds us that survival is never simple. It is fragile. It can be taken by natural forces or lost through slow change. A species can endure for countless generations, then vanish without a trace. The small humans leave behind no final chapter, no burial grounds or cities, no great monuments. Yet their absence is powerful. It asks us to look more closely at the silence in the fossil record. It invites us to consider that history is filled with stories that are only partly told. The earth still holds secrets in the quiet places. Forest floors hide ancient stones. Caves keep memories in the layers of dust and ash. Valleys hold fragments of lives that once moved across their rivers and hills. Many places have never been explored. Many bones still sleep in the dark, waiting for the right moment to be found. Each discovery changes the past. Each piece of evidence adds another voice to the story of who we are. We often think of our species as the inevitable result of evolution, but the small humans show another truth. We are only one possibility among many. We were not guaranteed to survive. We were not guaranteed to be alone. Our history is shared with others who were shaped by the land, just as we were. Their existence shows that life is resilient and creative. It adapts to different worlds. It makes something new from the same beginning. In this quiet reflection, the small humans leave us with a different perspective. They remind us that the world once felt larger and more mysterious. They remind us that the past is still incomplete. They remind us that there were other versions of us who lived and dreamed beneath the same sky. The silence of their disappearance does not mean their story has ended. It means that parts of it are still waiting to be found. Somewhere in the hills of Flores, or beneath the forest floor, or in a cave where no light has touched for centuries, pieces of that story still rest in the earth. The world is full of places where the past is not yet finished. The history of humanity is not a closed book. It is a story that continues to grow with every discovery and every question we ask. So we end this journey not with an answer, but with a soft reminder. The planet we walk today once belonged to many kinds of humans. Their footsteps are gone, their voices are quiet, yet their presence lingers in the bones, in the caves, in the tools shaped by their hands. They are still part of our story, and somewhere in the stillness of time, more of their story waits to be found.